that EOD gunnery sergeant, his name was Gunnery Sergeant Burkhart, he's telling everybody, get back, I found 2 more. In that hole were 2 155 rounds. We were like feet from him, like in the hole up to his waist, digging around, doing what they do, right? I mean, just balls this big. Right when we get in the vehicle, we shut our armored Humvee's doors, boom. So my name is Jason Angell. I'm a former U.S. Marine, and I served from 1993 until roughly 2008 as an enlisted Marine as well as an officer, and I had some broken time in there as well. I'm originally from Texas, right? I was actually born in Colorado, but I grew up in Texas, and I had a good childhood up until I was in the 6th grade. We lived in a little bitty, a 1950s style home next to a bayou. And if you know what a bayou is, it's a small, slow-moving river kind of around swamps, right? And Houston's full of swamps. And so that's where I grew up. So I grew up there until the 6th grade, hunting and fishing along bayous and having a good time. And then when I turned 6th grade, we moved to the coast. So the coastal waters of Texas, Galveston area. And I lived along that. My dad was a shrimper, so we had a couple boats. He was a commercial shrimper. And I grew up on the coast. And so I was always fishing and hunting and had a good time outside in the East Texas heat. Certainly I had a pretty standard childhood for Generation X, and it was a good time, and there was always hiccups, but my father and mother and sisters, I had a good time. It was nothing too crazy. I was in high school and I didn't really want to go to college. I didn't want 4 more years of C's and D's, and I was getting into a lot of trouble with my friends, making some bad choices right out of high school, and so I eventually realized that I needed to do something, right? And college wasn't it, but I wanted to join the Marine Corps because it sounded exciting. I wanted to get out there. I wanted to see the world, and the Marine Corps was the answer at that point. And my father was a United States Marine in Vietnam, and he did a tour in Vietnam, and I was patriotic just like him, and that's why I wanted to join. That's why I picked the Marine Corps. So my recruiting experience initially was I think fairly standard. I went to them. I wanted to join. I wanted to join as infantry, and I wanted to leave. That's what I told him. He's like, okay, no problem. Took my ASVAB, went to MEPS, and then came back. About a month later in 1993, I went and I showed up to MCRD San Diego in February 16th, 1993. I joined the infantry because I thought that was the heart of the Marine Corps, because it is. Marine Corps revolves around infantry, right? Just like the Air Force revolves around pilots. Marine Corps centers on infantry. That's what I wanted to do. If I was going to join the Marine Corps, I wanted to do full bore, and that's why I went to the Marine Corps. That's why I went to infantry, and I wanted 0311. I didn't want full mortars or machine guns, although now I look back at machine guns would be pretty cool too. Well, when I showed up to boot camp, it was at night. It was like on a Tuesday night, I believe, and get off the bus, the usual thing. They're yelling at you, screaming at you, and I'm a young, I'm 18, and so we're standing on the yellow footprints, and my right leg just started shaking out of control. I couldn't control it. I was scared, and I tried to stop it, I couldn't, and eventually it stopped. But I remember that right there. I was like, well, this is serious. My body's having functions I can't control because I'm scared, and that's part of the experience. And in the end, I kind of laughed about it, but at the time I wasn't laughing. So one story that's sticks out in my boot camp, my short boot camp career of 3 months was we were at Camp Pendleton. So back then we went up north to do weapons and field training and get your rifle qual, because back then in 1993 they didn't have the crucible, right? So we were up in Camp Pendleton, and I had fire watch at night. So for those who don't know, fire watch, there's always 4 recruits on duty when other recruits are sleeping, right? So you're cleaning and you're making sure nobody's doing something they're not supposed to do. In case there's fire, you can give the alarm. And so everybody's been getting up, and instead of putting your boots on, we just put our shoes on, right? Our running shoes. Back in boot camp, they called them go fasters. So we put those on, and 02 in the morning, some drill instructor comes outside the duty hut and sees us all kind of sandbagging it with our running shoes on, and for about 25 to 30 minutes, he made us duck walk up and down the squad bay. Painful. Duck walks, not easy. They're not fun. The next day, my legs were burning, and that really stuck out because it was a very painful learning experience. And that look, when you're on duty, do it 100%. And that was the reason for it, and I realized that quickly. In 1993, when I went through boot camp, there was no crucible. The first time we got called Marines is we were standing on that parade deck. And right before you start kind of do the review and pass, one of the senior generals kind of says, good morning, maybe first to say, good morning, Marines. And so we all stand at attention, say, hoorah, sir, good morning. That was the first time I ever called a Marine. There was no ceremony. Nobody gave me an Eagle, Globe, and Anchor, nothing like that. That was the first time we were called Marines, that morning. And that's the morning we graduated from boot camp. So I was in 0311, and back then, everybody went to Marine combat training, right? So now if O3s go to School of Infantry, and then if you're not an O3, you go to Marine combat training, do that, and you head off to your MOS school. Well, as an O3, we went to Marine combat training, and then we did a Seabag drag next door to Infantry Training Battalion, and went through about 2 months of infantry training. The O311s in that class, we had a mascot, and that mascot was a telephone pole. And I think the instructor, our troop instructors, we didn't have drill instructors then, it was just troop instructors there, and they made us carry that thing everywhere we went, because weapons guys, they had machine guns, they had mortars, assault had the small, but we had nothing. We just bought rifles, right? Because we're O311 riflemen. But they made us carry this pole with us for 2 weeks or for 2 months everywhere we went. And we tried to get ingenious by creating ways to carry it easier. Every time we did, the troop commander was like, "Nope, get out there. You're carrying it. You're going to suck it up and carry it." And that's what we did. Years later, I found that I found that troop instructor. He was a warrant officer with one of the MUs, and I was in the city of Hit, Iraq, and they were taking over. And I saw him, I introduced myself, and I told him, "Hey, I was in that class. I had that telephone pole as a mascot." He's like, "Yeah, I got in trouble for that. That's the last class we did that with." So it was painful, but it was neat, you know, and it was kind of a sense of pride, and a lot of us liked it, but it was painful at the time. In the end of August 1993, we graduated from infantry school as O311s. So then they put us all on buses. There must have been probably about 100 of us. They put us on buses, and we drove a few miles from infantry combat training to our unit. And back then, our unit was 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. They pulled up, all of us got out, and they started lining us up. "You're going to this company, you're going to this company, you're going to this company." And it was pretty standard. We got to the company until we got dropped to our platoon. So I went to 3rd Platoon, Lima Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. And that was an eye-opening experience. Initially, everybody was kind of quiet, just the usual boot nonsense. But as the time went on and we started doing training right after that, it became apparent that, you know, the most sadistic individual in the Marine Corps is a senior Lance Corporal who's been on a couple deployments but never picked up corporal. And those individuals were tough to deal with. But I noticed one thing in the infantry is if you can run and you can hike and you know your weapons, they kind of pretty much leave you alone. But if you show any weakness, if you can't hike, if you can't hump, when they're going after you, they're kind of hazing you, and you show weakness there, they pick up on that, and that's what they focus on. I was able to realize, don't do that, and I pushed through it pretty simple. But like I said, senior Lance Corporals were interesting characters back in the 90s. Once we get there, we start doing training, we realize that in a year, we're supposed to do a deployment to Okinawa, a UDP, or to the 31st MU, the Marine Expeditionary Unit. And so we started that training, and there's a whole block of training. You crawl, walk, run. So initially we started small fire team training, then we went to squad, platoon, company, and then MU type training, right? And it culminated in amphibious landings from naval ships to patrols to a McCree hike, which is 25-mile hikes within 8 hours with a certain amount of gear. And so that's what so everything leading up to that point was training for the MU and the preparation of it. But we were supposed to deploy in May of 1994. But in March of 1994, me and some friends were up in Orange County and going, you know, having a good time, just like all young Marines do. And we got into a vehicle accident, and I broke my leg, and I broke my tibula and fibula, and so then I instantly became non-deployable. And so that last year of training, all my buddies, my fire team, my squad, you know, I got pulled from all of them, and went to kind of like a rehab for a little bit for about 2 months. Then I went to Alpha Company 1-5 because 3-5 was deploying, and that was tough. But it was a completely different showing up there as a Lance Corporal. They had transferred from 3-5 as opposed to getting a boot drop. You know, they were like, "Hey, come aboard." I was a team leader after a couple months, and it was a lot better. But I wasn't, but I wasn't surrounded by senior Lance Corporals who knew I was a boot. Yeah, I didn't get to go on that deployment, but I wanted to keep going. So I was kind of starting the rehab. I was starting to feel better about my leg. One thing that came up was we were doing a live fire and maneuver exercise at a range in Camp Pendleton, and I was a team leader, and I was limping because of my leg and my knee. And the battalion commander saw it later on and asked me about it. He's like, "Why are you limping?" And I told him what happened. He's like, "Look, I'm glad you're out here pushing through it, but we can't have you doing live fire exercises limping. So you need to make sure you talk to a medical doctor. You stay in or get out. It's got to get fixed." So I went to the medical board, and they said, "Look, if you want to stay infantry, we can't do that because of your leg. You're going to have to get out. Or you can do an MOS change, and then you sit behind a desk." I was like, I don't want nothing to do with that. I just want to get out eventually. and go to college. And so that's what happened. You know, about a year and a half later, after the whole med board, I got discharged. That was my first enlistment. Yeah, I wasn't bitter because look, that was us. It happened. You know, and I just was like, look, I gotta push forward and do the best thing I can with what I'm given. So I was like, I'm gonna get out. Hopefully it heals, and I want to go to college and come back in as an officer. And that's exactly what I did. I went to Cal State Fullerton, and I got my degree in criminal justice. But to be a commissioned officer, it doesn't matter what your degree in. You could be underwater basket weaving or nuclear engineering. It doesn't matter. You just need a 4-year college degree. And so criminal justice sounded kind of fun compared to everything else, because I thought, look, if I'm not going to go back in the Marine Corps, maybe I'll be a federal agent, right? And but I ended up going back to the Marine Corps. So you don't have recruiters, you could have something called OSO, which is Officer Selection Officer, right? So you go there and you start developing your paperwork. It was fine. It wasn't like the recruiter. We were going to some pool meetings, but it was pretty standard. Look, get this stuff done, get your PT in, and we'll see if they're going to accept you to OCS. What happened is they kept denying, the Navy kept denying my request, but the Marine Corps approved it. And we figured out that it was because I was still technically a 10% disabled as a vet. And they're like, look, you can't come in the Marine Corps if you're a disabled vet. So go to Long Beach, go to the VA Center in Long Beach and get off of it. So he set up, my OSO set up a interview. I went up there to Long Beach, because this is the easiest thing I've ever done with the VA, was this experience here. Is I showed up, they got with my issues with my leg, they took a x-ray, and then I went and talked to a naval surgeon. And he's like, well, why are you here? I go, well, I'm trying to get off disability because I want to go back in the Marine Corps as an officer. And they're like, I have never had anybody come here and want to get off disability, ever. So he looked at my x-ray and then signed me off right there. You're good to go. There's nothing else. And that was it. And that was the only hiccup that I had. They accepted me OCS, and in June of 2000, I was standing in Quantico, Virginia. Yeah, OCS, as a prior, to be honest with you, I kind of enjoyed it because you have a foot up. There's probably about maybe 8 or 9 priors in my platoon, and the rest were just straight up college boys, right? So the rest of us, so they were the instructors. We don't call them drill instructors; we call them sergeant instructors. Although they're all gunnery sergeants, staff sergeants, and like a captain. They always brought us priors in, and we kept berating us. Hey, you're sandbagging it. You're not helping these candidates. You need to help them out. You're just going through the motions, right? They're kind of browbeating all of us about that, because we were just kind of chilling out, look, doing what we need to get done, but we weren't helping the candidates. And OCS boot camp have 2 different missions, right? One is to create Marines. The other one is to evaluate college boys to see if or college girls to see if they have the capability to lead Marines in combat. And that's what it was about. It was all about evaluating everything we did. And they were kicking people out left and right. Unlike boot camp, they try to get you to stay, right? OCS, they boot you out quickly, right? Medical issues, integrity issues. One of the candidates was lying. Boom, that night he was gone. And we had one individual who had graduated Harvard. And this, I remember thinking, why is he here to graduated? He's here because he wanted to go legal, right? He wanted to go to law. He wanted to get a law degree, then become a legal judge advocate in the Marine Corps. But he still had to go to OCS. And this individual complained, didn't do very good PT at all, fell asleep in classes, that type of stuff, right? It was a major issue. And one time we were in the heads, cleaning the heads, in the bathrooms, and he was complaining that he was a Harvard graduate that was having clean bathrooms. And I looked over at him and I told him, like, you're never gonna leave Marines with that. And sure enough, a couple of days later, he broke down crying in front of all the officer candidates and the instructors, saying how he doesn't want to be here anymore. And the instructors were brutal about it. They just let him cry, and we were sitting at attention while he sobbed. And they just let it, you just hear it echoing through the whole squad bay. And that night, MPs came in and took him home, or took him to the airport, whatever they do with him. He was gone. Wow. So that kind of stuck out. It's like, look, this isn't for everybody. You gotta be selfless. If you're complaining about cleaning the toilet because you went to some supposed prestigious college, Marine Corps don't care about that. Those instructors don't care about that at all. It doesn't impress them what college you went to. What impresses them is your ability to if you can, lead Marines in combat. So after OCS, when you get a commission, as you finally put your little butter bars on, right? You get your lieutenant bars on, second lieutenant bars. And then at that point, you still have to go to the basic school, TBS, right? And that's in Quantico. So that's 6 months of basically training how to be an officer, how to lead Marines, infantry stuff, weapons, systems, the whole thing. Anything that comes up in your future all happens at the basic school. OCS is just see if you have what it takes to be a Marine officer. The basic school, that's when you get your MOS, that's when you want duty stations. But the reality is for officers, unless you have a pilot's contract or a law contract, everybody else gets put into a one bowl where they pick certain people to be the MOSs, right? And it's all broken into thirds: top third, bottom third, middle third. And so there's only so many MOSs. They break it down per thirds, right? So if you have 30 infantry slots, it goes 10 to the top third, 10 to the bottom third, 10 to the middle third. And that's how you compete for those slots, at least back in 2001. And so if you want an infantry, you better be shit hot and try to be number one in your class, or you can try to game the game and be the top of the bottom third or the top of the middle third, but you don't really know. So I was at the bottom of the top third, and so I didn't get infantry. That's what I wanted. But I did get artillery, which was my second wish list, which I'm glad I got. It's a good MOS, but like I said, when I joined the Marine Corps initially, it was to be a grunt, to be infantry officer, and that's what I wanted to do. But Marine Corps it's Marine Corps' needs, and I got artillery, and at the end, I'm glad I got it because it allowed me to do a lot of things I didn't think I'd be able to do without it. September 11th, 2001, I was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, in artillery school, and we were doing artillery shoot. We were out in the field, and some Army lieutenant came up to us and said, "Did you hear what happened?" And that's when we started. Back then, we didn't have the phones we could do now. We had kind of analogs, but what we could find on the news right then was sporadic, right? There's some planes hit it. There might have been a bomb at the State Department. There was a lot of confusion. But when we were finally done that day, we went back to our barracks or rooms, and that's when we started watching what really happened. We saw video, we saw that. But what was interesting too is we had a lot of foreign officers with us who kind of do the course, right? The moment 9/11 happened, whoever it is in the Army, they came out and they isolated those officers, those foreign officers, right? Yeah, I think we had some Jordanians. We might have had some Bangladeshi. Those types of foreign officers were separated from everybody else because they didn't know who was a threat at all. So they isolated and put those guys under guard just for being, look, we didn't know what we were up against. Who can blame them? We didn't know, but that's where I was at. After I went to artillery school, I go to 1st Marine Division, 2nd Battalion, 11th Marines. And I go there, I kind of show up, and you talk to the Battalion XO, right? Because Battalion XO kind of leads the issues with lieutenants, right? He's putting them where they need to go, and those kind of administrative issues. So I'm talking to Battalion XO, and I'm asking him, so where am I think I'm going to go, sir? And he has a list of, and let me tell you this is December of 2001. So he has a list of the artillery batteries. He goes, well, this battery is in Okinawa, this battery is going to CAX, this battery is doing XYZ. He goes, but Fox Battery, he's looking at the board, right? So it's like Fox Battery, they just got tasked to go to Tajikistan and provide airfield security with 1-5. Because, I don't know if you know this, but back then, each infantry battalion had an artillery battalion they'd kind of work with mostly, right? An artillery battery they'd work with. So 1-5 worked with Fox Battery. They go on deployments together, Muse and stuff like that. You kind of have this relationship. And I don't think that's the case now. But back then they did. And so Fox Battery was going to go with 1-5 to Tajikistan to do airfield security, right? Part of the whole mission to support Afghanistan operations after 9/11. And so I'm like, heck yeah, I want to go there, sir. He's like, do you? I was surprised that he was like, do you want to go there? I was like, heck yeah, this is post 9/11. I didn't join to sit and go on a MU. I want to go to combat, especially after 9/11. You're a young officer or a young Marine. That's what you want to do. And that's what I went to. But unfortunately, 2 weeks later, it all got canked, right, in typical Marine Corps fashion. So I checked in early off of leave because I wanted to go to a unit that was going to deploy, and then it all got canked. So when I showed up, we were preparing for that mission, but all the other officers were good. The Marines were great, but as a second lieutenant, you want to shut up and listen. You don't want to, you don't know anything yet, really. So you want to listen and kind of see what's going on with the Marines and the leadership and whatnot. And so that's mostly what I did. I knew enough to know to keep my mouth shut because no matter what you did prior, being a second lieutenant, you kind of have everything against you, right? You have to prove yourself, and that's what eventually you have to kind of do, and just by doing what needs to get done. With Fox Battery, I was a forward observer, right? And so basically, while I was with Fox Battery, anytime I went to the field, usually it was either to do artillery support, call for fire for the battery, or I was over with 1-5 training with Alpha Company. Because then what was interesting is I was enlisted with 1-5, Alpha Company 1-5, and then just the luck of the draw, I was going to be the FO for Alpha Company 1-5, right? But of course, nobody was there that I was with. It was they'd all moved on, But it was good. But being a non-03, even though I was a prior 0311, being a non-03, you have to prove yourself to the grunts. What does that mean? It means you don't drop out of any hikes. You have initiative. You want to train those Marines on artillery. Anything you can do to prove yourself and be an asset, or else they're just looking down on you. One, because you're a pogue, right? You're not at 0311 or 03, you're an artillery officer, so you had to prove yourself, and that's what it was. But we eventually did. We did a lot of training at 29 Palms, but on the horizon, the storm on the horizon was OIF-1. We knew we were going, we just didn't know when. And it was always building up to it. We started getting briefings, this is coming up, and we knew that 2003, they're pushing for that, and that's what ended up happening. We ended up deploying, like with the rest of the division, or the MEF, to Kuwait. Beginning of February 2003, we showed up to Kuwait. They take us in buses with Army MP escorts with machine guns out to the middle of the desert, where they had these staging areas set up called LSAs, living support areas or something. I'm not sure what the acronym was, and then we started setting up tents, and then started building. They started bringing in, the rest of the units started coming in. Different battalions were coming in, depending on which regimental combat team you are. So with 211, with 2nd Battalion 211th, and then ultimately with 1-5, we were part of the RCT-5, 5th Marines Regimental Combat Team, commanded by Colonel Dunford at the time. Now he's General Dunford. And we just started training. We showed up there, getting equipment that was on the MSP ships, getting all that, and just started going in the desert and training and preparing for what was coming. We weren't even 100% sure we were going to invade. We thought it might have been a pump fake, or Saddam's going to back down, or the civilians didn't have enough balls to send us. But we were wrong. We went. They didn't tell us the day, right? So we realized, we woke up one morning like, hey, we're having a field day and field meet, right? So everybody kind of gets in, you're having fun. There's some skits, making fun of officers and the usual kind of stuff you do before you do something. They brought in some good food. We had some competitions. We were a little relaxing, but we knew it was the calm before the storm, because the next morning we woke up about 01. Everybody getting the AAVs. We're headed to the attack positions. So they woke us up, and we got into the AAVs, and we started heading north, probably about 15 miles north, closing in on the Kuwaiti border with Iraq. And we set up there. They spread us all out. Artillery batteries there just pointed north. Mortars are pointing north, and we're just training. The issue back then was chemicals, right? We thought he was going to gas us, legitimately. So we had our mop suits, we had our gas masks, that's brutal to deal with that, as you know. And so they started shooting scuds at us before we invaded. So they weren't very accurate. They were shot off in the desert, but we didn't know if they were filled with gas. So there was always these, gas. Everybody's clearing, donning their masks and sitting around waiting for the all clear. And then they started doing counter batteries. So they'd shoot mortars at us or shoot scuds at us. And then that's when our artillery and our mortars started shooting back. And then at that point, we're like, oh, this is real. Those guns over there on the border are shooting artillery back into Iraq. Those mortars are shooting back into Iraq. We knew it was real. We knew it was coming. And it did. It came. That night, we had some briefs. Hey, we're going to go in the morning. Then when the Iraqis started shooting at us, General Mattis, who was the 1st Marine Division commander at the time, says, no, we're going now. So they pushed the timeline up greatly. So instead of departing, 8 hours later, we're going in an hour. And so what that meant is then artillery did a 30-minute prep. So for 30 minutes, artillery is just pounding, guns are just pounding north. What happened too is that since they moved the timeline up, all that air support we were supposed to have in their pre-planned targets didn't get executed. They had to be taken over by artillery, because the air wing has, I think, something called ATO, Air Tasking Order. It's all set up, but they got moved by the commander, and so they had to make adjustments. And so it was just artillery support initially. And they're like, get in your AAVs, we're going. And it was just getting dark. We get in, button up, we get to the border. We went around a little bit, and they had blown some of the berms. They blew some berms. And then first, with Alpha Company 1-5, 1-5 was the 1st battalion at least in our sector. We were always told it was the 1st battalion in Iraq for the Marines. But in our area, we went through. And Alpha Company was the 1st infantry company. However, the tanks moved through before us. Right when they cut through the berm, they started engaging some Iraqi tanks that were on the other side. And we think they might have been abandoned, but they were still warm. Hey, it's war. They started blowing these tanks right up there. We even pushed out some javelin gunners, and they shot javelins at some of these tanks too. Interesting point there, though, is like 2 of those javelins were like misfires, and I think a javelin cost something like $70,000 each, right? So just $140,000 wasted, typical stuff. But at the time we were just like, this is crazy. So we started moving north that night, and each company had its own objectives, right? So we kind of followed the battalion moving through. Charlie Company had this gas oil separation plants they had secure because they were getting guarded by Iraqi army. There were some strong points we hit. But at the end of the morning, Alpha Company had their their mission, their objective to hit. So it was getting close to morning. We were dropping bombs around the pumping station where the Iraqis had dug in. And then I started bringing artillery on them for about 15, 20 minutes, just hitting them with artillery. And then we moved through. The AAVs pulled up, dropped rants, the Marines started clearing those trenches. And there were wounded in there, Iraqi wounded, and a couple holdouts. And just out of the blue, I'm in an AAV, and we're just kind of, I'm glassing the area looking for artillery targets past the infantry. And out of the blue, some Iraqi just gets on a motorcycle and starts going down the road trying to escape. And those Marines opened up on his ass and going down the road. And he wasn't armed, he was an Iraqi soldier. And back then, there already was like Iraqi soldiers were legitimate targets, armed or not, unless they were surrendering. That's right. So that was a key point. He wasn't. They unloaded on that guy, and then they shot him right off that motorcycle. Wow. So, which was an eye opener. There, the first time you see in combat, and you're starting to see this stuff come in, and all that training you did, you're like, is this going to work? It does. And I was really thankful for a lot of the training we got put through, the hard nights and the hard days, because it worked, and the machine worked surprisingly, right?
Yeah.
And later that morning, probably about an hour after that, is when we had the first KIA. And the Marines were clearing the trenches again, and out of the blue, a couple SUVs come screaming down the road, and they were full of Iraqi soldiers. And we think they were more the Fedayeen. And back then, they didn't call them insurgents; they called them Fedayeen. These are like Saddam loyalists, right? And they started shooting AKs at one of the platoons, and of course the platoons, fired back and killed the enemy driving those SUVs. But they got lucky; they had shot Shane Childers, which was one of our platoon commanders, underneath the SAPI plate. And he bled out right there on that morning and died. He was a former enlisted Marine. And then he wanted to go, obviously became an officer. But I knew him, and we shook hands before we got in AVs that night, but I never saw him again. Man, he loved the Marine Corps. He trusted it. He put his life into it. And that's what it was. He was a consummate professional. He was always asking me questions about artillery, right? He wasn't putting it down because we were in infantry. He was like, tell me about how you do this. What could you do here? Could you teach my Marines this? Yeah, I worked with him and some of the other platoons, and so they could learn that. And he brought a lot of that up. He was real proactive, just a good leader, a good man, period. And he got killed, and he had a burial a few days later in Wyoming, where he was from. And he came over the radio. Hey, we have a wounded, and he's KIA now. And we're like, who? They didn't put that over the radio, but it came out through different channels of who it was. And I was one of the AAVs with the FIST team. The FIST team was called the Fire Support Team. So you have the company XO, you have the CO, and you have artillery expert, and you have forward air controller in there, right? And so we're getting briefings on what happened, and instantly people were like, what? Somebody said, I remember somebody specifically mentioned, what a waste. And me and another Marine was like, no, that's not a waste. We can't say that. Maybe I'm ignorant, maybe I'm not, but at the time I was like, look, he died for a reason. Marines die. It was tough, but you had to kind of, people were quiet after that for a while. Only business was talked about. Would be delved into their own thoughts, because at that point you're like, I was just talking to him. This war it was less than 24 hours old, and we already have a KIA, and we had to deal with that. And we also had wounded. So as the Marines were clearing the trenches and clearing those fighting positions, we had some Marines that stepped on some possible, not IEDs, we didn't call them IEDs, there were small mines, toe poppers, stuff like that, and got wounded. And we're dealing with that as well. But it was an eye-opener. We turned over a relative few hours later with the British, because the British were kind of taking control of Basra area, the southern part of Iraq, and then we headed north with the rest of the division. When we invaded Iraq, it wasn't this big front lines. We were all on the avenues of approach. We were on the MSRs, right, the roads, because the main thing we want to do is get to Baghdad as soon as possible, because the leadership said that was their center of gravity, was ability to control Baghdad, which they're probably right. So we tried to get to Baghdad as soon as we could, but along the way, skirmishes, firefights, plenty of dead Iraqis that had been mowed down by air support or whatever the case was. And we saw death quite a bit during that drive up. And sometimes we were involved, and there was also a lot of boredom, just waiting on these long trails of AEVs and artillery pieces, and it was just a lot of infrastructure on the road, and it was an eye opener. And we didn't get much sleep. I think that first night, I don't think I slept at all. I think I went about 32 hours before I got any sleep. And if you ever went that long without sleep, it really starts messing with your mind and your ability to think. And so finally we got some, we got a position in, started a rotation, kind of rest, and that helped out. But the rest of the deployment up until April 9th, it was just shooting and moving, right? Boredom, shoot and move. A lot of issues with, there was so much logistics, right? So vehicles would break down. We have to switch AAVs. We had it lucky where I was at in the fifth vehicle, but the other vehicles, AAVs, they were crammed in there with, a squad of Marines plus. And those AAVs don't have a lot of room, as you know.
Yeah.
And they're cramped in there. That exhaust, that smoke in your face the whole time, and God knows what's going on, physically because of all that stuff. But it was interesting. The first time I ever fired my weapon was April 9th, and we were sitting outside of Baghdad in a suburb called Sadr City, and we were linking up with the U.S. Army Special Forces unit because we were going to attack a palace in Baghdad. So we're waiting around to link up with the Special Forces team, and Iraqis were everywhere. They were looting stuff, they were cheering, they were celebrating, they were saying thank you, everywhere, right? But we're all part of that Special Forces team had a couple of CIA paramilitary officers with them. The usual stuff, 5'11" pants, the baseball hat, but they're the CIA guys. And they were just watching the traffic kind of go back and forth. And out of the blue, they started shooting at a car. And we're a whole company of infantry Marines, right? Everybody moves their weapons and start engaging that one vehicle. Overwhelming firepower. That's Marine Corps how it is. It's not strategic, right? It's overwhelming. And we blew the hell out of this vehicle because of the CIA paramilitary officers that said it was a target. But later on, we found out that, it was nobody in there but a family. And a child and a father and a mother and a baby and a young children were killed, because of that. It's not friendly fire, but we killed civilians. And, we were just firing on, it's not an excuse, but we were firing on because the CIA paramilitary guys were firing on this target. So we thought it was a threat. We're Marines, we fired on the threat. But there were civilians in there and they died. And we found out a few hours later, it kind of came over the radio. And, that's something that at the time I was like, oh, it's just war. But once I had children, the thought of, that really came back to me, because nobody wants to kill a child or a civilian for that matter at all. But it happened, it kind of messes with you a little bit, you're like, man, that's war. It's not fun. A lot of stuff happens that you hate, and that was a big eye opener for me as well. It's especially because I engaged like with all the other Marines, and it was April 9th is when most of the media was saying at Baghdad fell, right? Not for us. So the night of April 9th, once we linked up with the Special Forces element, we made our movement to northern Baghdad to a palace called I think it was Al Azimaya Palace, and it was on the banks of the Tigris River. It was dark, power was out, and there was nobody on the street. And I remember we're standing outside the AAVs and with our NVGs on, we're moving forward, we're moving pretty good down the road. And then I remember looking towards the rear of the column, because I think Alpha Company was in front, so the rest of the battalion was behind us on the road. And then you start seeing tracers on both sides of the roads coming back and forth between the AAVs behind us. And as I'm reporting up on the radio, that's when we got hit. I remember just tracers coming between us in the AAV. It didn't hit us out of sheer luck. And I remember the tracers coming between us. I remember thinking, did it hit us in some sparks? They weren't sparks. They were tracer rounds. And that's when we started engaging. RPGs are getting shot at us. We're still moving, but these Fedayeen fighters were everywhere along that route. And I don't know if they were paralleling us in vehicles or if they just set up fighting positions because they knew, the Americans were coming. But that whole route in there, we were hit. And in fact, we got lost a little bit just because of the chaos. And we had to turn around, and one of our AVs got stuck on a Jersey barrier, right? A K-rail, whatever you call them. And so we had to have, under fire, AAV mechs had to come out, fix the track, as we were getting engaged. And they started shooting a loom over us. And the enemy was shooting a loom over us, so it negated our NVGs, right? Washed them out. But then they can see us now. So there's a loom right over us, bright lights, and now we're getting engaged even more because they can see us. We were just sheer luck. We got hit, each vehicle almost got hit numerous times. And we were lucky, I think the wounded was minimal there. My thought was we're in AAVs, but the Special Forces guys were in softback Humvees that they had rigged with machine guns at every door, right? But so that they made it through. So anyway, we pushed through some of that, headed back into Baghdad, finally get to the palace. We're still under fire. Around the palace, there's Fedayeen fighters. Our weapons company sets up a perimeter. We go into the palace. I think they were looking for Saddam. There might have been a Saddam sighting. That's why they put the SF team with us. But there was obviously no Saddam there. He wasn't there. It was an empty palace. It had been blown to shit by our air power. And we secured it and kind of started relaxing. That was a fight. The Marines were kind of cooling down, coming off that high of basically like 7 hours of fighting, of shooting, engaging from the backs of the AAVs. But then our company first sergeant, we hear him talking to the company CEO. And he's like, all I hear is like, he's gone, sir, he's gone. And we kind of, attention goes to it, like Gunny Boer is gone. The company Gunny got killed. His name was Gunnery Sergeant Jeffrey Boer. He was in a softback Humvee because back then there was no armored Humvees. It was softback, and that was back in those regular harder ones, but they weren't armored. But he was in a softback, and he volunteered to go with the company. He's like, no, we're not going to stay back. We're going to go with the company. And they engaged the softbacks even more than the AAVs because they're such a soft target, at least from what we're told, from what the Marines in the vehicle. He got killed right there, and he died. That was our second KIA, and that was a big hit because the Marines loved him. I mean, he was a hard-ass gunnery sergeant, former Army Ranger, became a Marine, just tough as nails. And but he cared about the Marines. He wasn't just an asshole. He cared about them, but he was tough. And as you know, as Marines respect that. And he was loved and respected by the Marines. It was tough on everybody when he died. We got word that there was a mosque down the street, and they said there might have been another Saddam sighting at the mosque. So battalion tasked Alpha Company with attacking the mosque, secure it, and search to make sure that Saddam's not there. And those Fedayeen fighters had fighting positions along that whole route, everywhere, right? So there were fighting positions on the road. They were in dugout positions. They were in bunkers with sandbags engaging us. So they'd run along the streets, shoot RPGs, and hide again. And that whole way there, we're scraping. Those AEVs are wide, right? They're big beasts. And then we had our packs strapped to them. So they're scraping the walls. Packs are coming off, right? We're not going back to get them under a firefight. We're crushing cars, it's just all out combat. And we get to the mosque, do a perimeter. One of the platoons goes in, and they got about 4 or 5 like foreign fighters, right? So these guys had passports from Chechnya, Jordan, not Israel, but Syria, those places. And they wanted to come to Iraq to fight, and they did. And they got captured or killed at the mosque. But that whole time, insurgents were attacking us as we secured it. And we were bringing in, not me, but our forward air controller was bringing in A-10s because Marine aviation wasn't allowed to fly over the city. The Cobras couldn't because it wasn't secure yet. There was so much fire going out that Cobras couldn't. They wanted to support us, but the air wing, for whatever reason, denied them to fly over. So the only support we had was Air Force A-10s. And the FAC was bringing in gun runs from that 30 millimeter cannon that thing carries, just tearing it up. And they dropped some bombs, and that was amazing to watch, and the whole thing come together because vehicles were getting hit by RPGs, we were having more wounded. It was significant, and it was all out fight. And then finally we left once it was secured and went back to the palace, and for about a week, and after that there wasn't much fighting. We went by Nasiriyah, but we bypassed it once they were attacking Nasiriyah and they were in that fight because they wanted to continue to push us north because the main objective really was Baghdad. That was about it. We started going on some patrols outside the city, and for about 2 weeks, maybe less, we held the palace. And then before you knew it, hey, we got orders to retrograde back to closer to Kuwait, and the army came in and took over our position as we moved south to get out of country. It felt good. I thought we did well, especially back then. Iraqis were saying thank you. They weren't blowing us up with IEDs. Most of them were saying thank you. And so we thought we did a good thing, which we did, but it was different, right? We thought we weren't invaders, we were liberators. We liberated this country from Saddam, and that's what we felt. It was tough, yes. Did we see a lot of combat? Sometimes, different periods, but we were proud of what we did, and we were coming back to the States proud. It was a short deployment. It was 3.5 months, 4 months I was over there for the invasion before they pushed us back to the States, and I felt good. The Marines did well. Just like you expect that training, you're always questioned, right? Is this going to work? Does it work? It does. And the Marines did really well. Just tough Marines doing what needed to get done, and they did it. That was the beginning, really, of the whole war stuff, right? Because when I initially joined, there wasn't. This was before 9/11, right? So when I initially joined before 9/11, I just wanted to deploy. If there's combat, maybe. Back then, we just thought that you might do a MEU, maybe land somewhere. That was about it. We didn't think it was going to be the combat we was going to see, and we weren't, because 9/11 hadn't happened yet. So we were pretty happy about that. But then going forward after that, we thought it was over. Iraq was liberated. We didn't know where it was going to happen. We didn't think there was going to be an insurgency. None of that. We were going back to the States to continue on with the rest of what needed to get done. We didn't know we were going to be a follow-on mission until beginning of 2004. And beginning of 2004, I was in Okinawa as part of the 31st MEU with my Fox battery. We went over there with 1-5. 1-5 got pulled from Okinawa to go to Iraq. It popped up. They wanted 1-5. The artillery battery I was with, we stayed with the MEU. They brought in a battalion from the 3rd Marines. So 2-3, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines came in and did the MEU with us. But like I said, 2004, they were flaring up. Iraq flared up. Najaf, the whole issue with Blackwater contractors in Fallujah. 1-5 went over there to help quell that, and because the Army was asking for Marines to come back because they needed bodies. The next significant event there is going to 1st Anglico. And so whenever I was at the end of my lieutenant tour with Fox Battery 211, and our battalion X was like, where do you want to go for your B billet? I didn't want to go do recruiting. I didn't want to go to do the drill field as an officer. I didn't want to do any of that. I wanted to stay in and go back to Iraq because stuff was flaring up. And so I asked him about Anglico because I knew what it was. Because when I was a young Marine in SOI, the first time I ever heard about Anglico or any type of unit like that, we were sitting on our packs, we were coming back from a hump, and these 4 Marines pop out of the woods along this draw, right? And so we're sitting there drinking water. I'm just watching these Marines. They had the boonie covers. And back in 93, as you know, the 90s, nobody was allowed to wear the boonie cover unless you're in the fleet and specifically allowed to. And so we were like, who are these guys? You know, because when you're a young PFC, you're looking up to everybody, especially something that looks like they're doing something cool, right? Or high speed. And so we watched these 4 Marines come out. Each one of them had these huge packs on, not the normal Alice pack we had in 99 or in 1993. These were like mountain rucks, and they all were camouflaged head to toe, camo paint, and they all had radios sticking out. And they come out of the woods, they get into a defensive 360 back to back, and we hear these jets coming down the draw that were coming above it fast and just burning. It's like they're coming down the draw and they just pop up and kind of do an invert and do a dry run, like they're bombing somebody, right? And you could tell that team was talking to the aircraft, and we're like, this is crazy. And before we knew it, they were gone. And I was like, who were they? You know, other Marines were talking about. We thought they were recon or something like that. Later that night, we get back and I go to the post exchange, little store at SOI, and I wanted to get some Dr. Pepper and I wanted to get some tobacco, right? Some Copenhagen or something. And one of those Marines was there. I guess they were stopped. They wanted to go in there. One of them dropped their weapon. They went into the PX, and I went up to him when I got my soda, and I was like, evening corporal. He's like, hey, how you doing, man? And I was surprised at how cavalier he really was, because as a PFC in boot camp, a corporal, they let you know who's in charge, no matter what. It could be an admin corporal, an admin at S1, right? They let you know who's in charge. But this guy was talking to me just like I was a man, and I was pretty impressed with it. And I was like, hey, what's up? What's up, man? I'm just here getting some. He's like, I'm just here getting some skull. Our captain let us take a break real quick. I've been in the field for about a week. I'm like, well, what unit you with, Corporal? And he's like, I'm with a unit called 1st Anglican. I was like, what's that? He goes, 1st Anglican stands for Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company. And what we do is work in small teams, or we coordinate close air support. We identify targets, we'll laze them, we'll call them in. We also jump out of airplanes. They were jump qualified back then. He goes, yeah, it's not your average grunt shit, Devil Dog. This is, we do a lot of cool stuff. And right now, he's like, I got about a 15 click patrol until they pick us up. So we're resting a little bit and heading out. I was like, this is cool. That sounds neat, right? And that was the first time I heard about Anglico until later on. At some point in the late 90s, just like they disbanded it and became a Marine Liaison Element. But then after 9/11, they brought him back, right? Typical Marine Corps fashion. But they did away with the jump mission, except for if you're going on MEU. So if you're going on MEU, or you're going to be working with the Army, airborne units, you get the jump call. But for Iraq, nobody was jumping anywhere. Nobody went. It was just, we want bodies over there to get in the fight. Anyway, so After I got back from Okinawa, I'm ready to change. I told my XO that's what I wanted. It wasn't in the works. So they sent me to, the only bill available was as a training officer, the FSSG, right? The First Force Service Support Group, which is like admin and motor T and all that stuff put together. And, I didn't want to be there. Those guys and women, they do a tough, needed job, but I didn't want to do it. I wanted to go back to Iraq. And I was there a couple weeks, and then my old battalion XO called me. He's like, Angel, you want to go to Anglico still? I was like, hell yeah. He's like, they just doubled the size of the company. The monitor's going to call you. 15 minutes later, talked to the monitor. A couple weeks later, I was out of there, back and going to First Anglico, and I was psyched, because we found out. He goes, if you volunteer to go to Anglico, that means 2 combat deployments. Are you ready for that? I was like, yes, sir. I'm ready to go. And because back then everybody wanted to get a piece of the pie, and it was just blowing up then, and that's where everybody wanted to be. And I volunteered to go, and that's where I wanted to go, and I was happy to go. I showed up to Anglico, and they had just expanded the unit, right? And so let me tell you a little bit about Anglico. So a lot of time Anglico, they support, the Marine Corps provide an Anglico team to non-Marine units that are working like adjacent to Marine units or within Marine area of operations. So example in Iraq, Al Anbar province at that time was controlled by the Marine Corps. But we had a lot of Army units working in Iraq, right? Especially Ramadi. Ramadi was controlled by an Army brigade, a National Guard brigade at the time. So the Marine Corps gives them Anglico teams so they can help them with close air support, can identify targets, bring in those types of assets, right? And so we're out with patrols, squads, we're out with companies. We also have air officers in the TOCs. The Army calls a TOC a Tactical Operations Center, same as the Marine Corps' COC, right? So that's what we were doing, and that's what we knew we were doing. But so when I found out we were going, instantly had to get one qualification called JTAC. And to calling air support, you have to be either a forward air controller, which are all pilots, or you have to be a JTAC, and it stands for Joint Terminal Attack Controller. Basically, you're authorized to say cleared hot, identify a target cleared hot, and drop bombs on something within close proximity to friendly troops. You need a certification. And so I had to go to school for that, and initially went to Coronado, took it, and then I had to get that out of the way, and then went back to the unit and started doing a lot of training. So once I got my JTAC qual, I show back up to the company, and I get my team. I have a firepower control team. All right, this is a 4-man team that Anglico has at the lowest level. They have like division and battalion and company size, but at the lowest level, those who are out there those who are out there doing patrols, those who are calling in airstrikes, it's called the firepower control team, and that is led by a JTAC or a forward air controller as the team leader. And you have 3 Marines. One of them is a communications Marine, which we had so much comm gear with Anglico, it was crazy. We had more than a lot of infantry companies as one team. And then we had a fire support chief, a scout observer, and another scout observer. And those were your experts on calling in artillery, naval guns, mortars, and provide defense and weapons training for when we're doing a lot of small team stuff. And those Marines were outstanding. I got a Marine who was a former 82nd Airborne soldier. He was my team chief. And then I got my comm chief. He was an Anglico Marine who had seen action in, I think, Fallujah and Najaf with the MEU. And then my youngest guy, his name was John Curidan, young, out of school, but 17 at the time, I think, or had just turned 18. So he graduated at 17, volunteered for the Marine Corps. His mom had to sign off on him, and he showed up. And these Marines were outstanding. I mean, they wanted to be there. They wanted to learn. They asked questions. They weren't shitbirds or nothing. So one of the first training evolutions we did was a ruck run with the platoon. We never did that in artillery or even infantry. We didn't have ruck runs. We hiked fast, but they didn't want you running. Here was a run. Everybody get your packs on. We're running the hills. And I loved it. It was tough. It took grit, but I liked the challenge. And people were looking at us like, what are these guys running with packs for? I like that whole mentality of training hard. And that's why I joined. I was really glad to be there. August of 2005. We showed up in Ramadi, and then we would depart later on in May of 2006. But in August of 2005, Ramadi was they didn't have enough soldiers or Marines. It was Fallujah had just fallen, right, about a year, 9 months prior. And so most of those insurgents who survived or left Fallujah went to Ramadi. And the attacks there were out of control. And there just wasn't enough bodies. But the Marines were dealing with it. The soldiers were dealing with it. And when I showed up, it was mostly ran by National Guard, from the Pennsylvania National Guard, they call it 228. So 28th Infantry Division as a National Guard unit. And at least then it was, I'm not sure now. And that's who was running Ramadi. And underneath them, they had a Marine battalion, a couple Marine battalions, and a few National Guard battalions. And Anglico went there and started supporting the Army battalions. When I went on patrols, because they didn't have a way to call in airstrikes to get support. They have a couple Air Force guys, but they don't really go out on missions like Marines do. And that's what we started doing, just getting out there grinding. And first mission I went to, show up, our sister company, 2nd Anglico, which is based out of Camp Lejeune, they were leaving. And they were like, you're not dropping a bomb in Ramadi. It's the provisional capital of Al-Anbar province. You got to get a clearance. It sucks here. And they're right. I mean, it wasn't very fun at all. It was tough. But it was kind of an eye-opener. There was all these new requirements. Like, we didn't know what a TIC was. Troops in contact. We didn't have that during invasion. Troops in contact is a big issue when you deal with getting support during the occupation. You know, we didn't know what I mean by PID. That means positive identification. We had to have PID, declare a TIC before we could start bringing in, you know, firepower. So there's a lot of issues we had to learn, and we had to learn to deal with the National Guard, which are great men and women, really selfless, great people doing this the day-to-day occupation, patrols, ECPs, everything. But their standards aren't Marine standards, so you got to learn to deal with that and help them out. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to show up and start, you need to do this. You don't want to hear that. They won't want your help. But they needed our help. They needed support, air support or whatever. And that's what we're there to do. But we had to build these relationships with the Army, National Guard by being open to, hey, this is what we can do for you. And one of those first missions, I was doing left seat, right seat with 2nd Anglico. And he's like, look, these guys aren't Marines. Don't expect them to be. If you start complaining, they're not going to want your help, and they need it. That was a learning point. So you can't come there typical Marine fashion, cocky and arrogant, all that nonsense. You have to be there open-minded as a team player, ready to support these soldiers. And that's what we did. And that's what 2nd Anglico really helped us with that. But I was at first patrol, somebody took a pop shot at us, right? And I hadn't been shot at since the invasion, and it was a lot different. The occupation was different. ROEs were different. You just couldn't shoot, thankfully, I guess, but we didn't know who it was. But it got the adrenaline pumping, and I had to go back and tell those Marines, like, look, this is really ambiguous out there. This isn't so clear cut. You don't know who's on your side. You don't know what's going on. You have to really learn, keep your eyes open, learn from those guys who've been in country, but don't be afraid to speak out, because it was a completely different work than during the invasion. You know, the counterinsurgency takes you have to accept a lot more risks than you would during the invasion. You know, so then one of the first ops that I did is they sent me and my team, and I had 2 snipers attached to us. And we went to provide overwatch of this rural road in the rural part of Ramadi. Not where there's a lot of buildings, this was just desert with elevating terrain. And we got it inserted, and just to watch the road. And we had aircraft on station, or quickly could summon them. And we set up a hide site, and we were just watching the road. For that first mission there was 3 nights, 2 days, or 2 nights, 3 days. You know, in August, sitting in a position with some, you know, camionetting overhead where they can't see you from the road because you don't want to get shot at by mostly Americans driving down it, right? Also, you don't want to get noticed by insurgents planting IEDs, because then in Ramadi in 2005, the biggest threat was the IEDs. They had perfected it and were making it. I mean, they were perfecting this weapon system, and that's how we really fought. We had to fight those putting in. We had to fight dealing with the IEDs. The most frustrating thing about an IED I always felt was it didn't give you the chance to fight back. They would blow this thing, nothing. You could just shoot anywhere you want, thinking there might be a trigger man there, but you can't do that in counterinsurgency because you don't want to shoot civilians. You know, we're here to help them, not kill everybody, right? That was a tough part, is dealing with those IEDs mentally. It drains you mentally, right? You don't know when they're going to explode. They're on the road. If you're in the vehicles, you're where the IEDs are, right? So the IEDs were the fight where it was at. So we were getting hit all the time. Most of the IEDs were kind of a little shrapnel here and there, but some weren't. Some were a lot bigger, and they killed. They were blowing up Bradley fighting vehicles, you know. And as you've seen a Bradley, they're huge. AVs, huge. And they're doing up double stack mines, triple stack 155 rounds to blow you up. And they were perfecting it. But the hardest part I had with that is you couldn't fight back. They just blow it up, and you're frustrated. You know, it's like walking into a bar, getting punched in the back of the head, and you turn around and you don't know who did it. it was like that constantly. And it starts draining you. It starts pulling your initiative. It starts pulling your, your motivation as well. And that's why we were really reactive in Ramadi at that time. Really reactive. We were just reacting to everything they did, right? IED, react. You're on patrol, you get shot at, react. Yes, we did raids. Yes, we did some bigger operations, but most of it was just reacting. There just wasn't enough bodies in 05 in Ramadi to do what needs to get done. In middle of September, we had my team. We were working with a National Guard company. They were based out of Vermont, but they're obviously in Ramadi. And so a lot of these guys were former cops. Now they're just reservists, or National Guardsmen over there. So they had some great skills. But we were supposed to go on a foot patrol, which I was excited about because everything was back then as a vehicle. When you're in those vehicles, you're insulated. You're not out there. I think it was a bigger threat because they know where you're going to drive. So we were set to do some dismounted urban patrols there and just outside of one of the gates. And then word came down that they had an IED explosion that killed some people out in the city. And they called me and said, hey, the CO wants you out in this sector with us. Get your team, come down here. So me and my guys switched over to vehicle ops, hurried down, linked up with some of their people from at one of the gates, and drove out to where the incident occurred. And so as we're pulling up to the incident, everybody's on the road, right? Nobody wants to go off the road because that's what IEDs are, is on the side of the road. So it was this clear, kind of just dirt and dust off in the distance. There's some buildings, but it was mostly we had some space between us in the buildings. And there'd been several IEDs blow up, and it blew up a Bradley fighting vehicle. In fact, when we pulled out, and when we could see the area, the Bradley fighting vehicle was on its side. So this IED was so big, it blasted the Bradley fighting vehicle, so it was on its side. It tipped it over, and I mean that's a huge IED. And they hadn't been cleared, so nobody had got to it yet, except for after the immediate response. So I go over there, I find the QRF leader, link up with him, and I worked with him before, and he's like, hey, stay on the road. Don't go off the road. As you can see, IEDs are everywhere. And I was like, yeah, check that. I go, I'm gonna pull down here in case they start fighting us. I'm gonna have aircraft overhead. So me and one of my Marines, Chad Dyer, get out of our vehicle, go and talk to QRF commander. And I say, what's the situation? Try to get a situation update. I'm starting to get aircraft overhead to kind of help them out in case the insurgents really want to fight. And so I look over here, and there's an EOD Marine inside of a big blast crater. He's in there doing a post-blast analysis, whatever, right? You kind of look down, this guy's in this huge hole. Fair enough, whatever. Talk to him. He's like, get back in your vehicle, stage up there, stay inside it because there's IEDs everywhere. And before I shut my door, that EOD gunnery sergeant, his name was Gunnery Sergeant Burkhart, he's telling everybody, get back, I found 2 more. In that hole were 2 155 rounds, or suspected 155 rounds. We were like feet from him, like 10 feet from this EOD tech. He's in the hole up to his waist, digging around, doing what they do, right? I mean, just balls this big. And so right when we get in the vehicle, we shut our armored Humvee's doors. Boom! It was so close. There's explosions, dust kicks up everywhere, right? If you have dust on you, it's kicked up. Explosion. You don't black out, but it's almost like you skip a beat. It was so close, and dust everywhere, and he had blown up. IED went off, and I was shaking my head. I made sure my gunner Kieran was good to go, and once he found he was good to go, I looked over at one of my Marines. I'm like, that EOD Marine's dead. He was in that fucking hole, and it blew up. And as I open up my Humvee's door, and I kind of look back here, and they're tending to him. He was in one piece. They had pulled him out, and they were working on him. And I was surprised that he wasn't just pink mist. That was how crazy the situation was. He was in this hole with 2 155 rounds, or at least 105 rounds, and it blew up. And he got blown up. It flipped around, came back down on the ground. But that was it. He might have had a couple cuts from a little shrapnel, but just the way it blew up, luck, God, I don't know. He didn't die. He didn't get killed. It rang his chimes pretty good, right? I'm sure he had some hearing issues, and I look back again, he doesn't have any pants on. He has boots, his upper body armor, and they had cut off his cami bottoms. So he just got his underwear, right? Whatever it is. And he's standing up, and they're helping him, looking him over, and I look back, and he's flipping off the city. And right then, one of the photographer that was with them took a picture. So you can go online now, and you see EOD tech, I think it was Gunnery Sergeant Burkhart, and you see him flipping off the city. And it was the Omaha World Herald that took that video. You can go out there and find it too, and it was amazing. This guy lived. I would have bet, you know, my marriage, my wife, that this guy died, but he didn't, man. He lived, and you know, I don't believe in necessarily miracles, but it was something. They weren't using those EOD suits much at all. He had regular, like what me and you would wear, right? Hands, nothing. I mean, and I think he was off for about a week or two, and he was back at it. I know, that's the Marine Corps, man. I was just like, because I would have swore that man was dead, but he didn't, thankfully. Those were the kind of missions we were doing, right? One day we'd be on QRF, we'd be attached to QRF as kind of a duty. Hey, you're a QRF team today. But most of those QRFs, I was thinking it sounded sexy, right? We're gonna go out and there's gonna be firefights, and then we're gonna be supporting. That wasn't it. In Ramadi, it was, hey, we have QRF because we need to get EOD to disable this freaking IED. And that's what QRF 99% of the time was. It was boring. EOD takes their time for good reason, right? They're dealing with live ordnance, and you don't know when it's going to blow up. And that was mostly QRF. But that was occasionally, right? So we had that maybe one every 5-6 days. Then we were just going on missions with the companies, getting out there as an Anglico team. You got to be creative. Hey, I can do this for you. This is what I can do. They were great. Once you're being proactive, when you want to work with these National Guard soldiers, they're like, hey, I want to go out and do this with you. No problem. Where do you want to go? When do you want to go? You got to be proactive and jump in there to support them. They're not going to tell you what they want because they don't know what the hell you do. To them, Marines are all the same, right? But once they know what you do, what you bring to the table, they wanted us out there. Commanders, platoon commanders, sergeants. That's what it became to. And then eventually, halfway through the deployment, our Anglico det switched up the team. So we had a det that was a place called Camp Ramadi, which is in eastern Ramadi. And we were in western Ramadi at Camp Ramadi. And so they switched all those teams up. Eastern Ramadi was significantly more dangerous. The issue there was IEDs, but it was also attacks. Some of these insurgents in eastern Ramadi tried to overrun OPs. As you can see, in 2004, there was a sniper team with 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines that got overran. This is the type of insurgents we were dealing with in eastern Ramadi. We were based out of Camp Corregidor. And things changed significantly. So once we go over there, my team and I, we fall into kind of a task force. And an Army unit, we started working with a new Army unit called 1st of the 506. This is the same battalion from Band of Brothers, right? They're no longer airborne, I think they're air assault. They're part of the 101st, but it's still roughly the same lineage. But except for Easy Company there, it was like their maintenance company. So we started working with them. And 1st of the 506 was an aggressive light infantry Army battalion. They were outstanding. And before I got there, one of our Anglico dets, they started setting up, they set up a task force. So they worked with 1st of the 506 and the Anglico det created this task force called Task Force Dark Eagle. And what it was is they were bringing a 4-man scout team, which is in the Army, scouts and snipers are two different things, right? They have scouts and they have snipers. So the 4-man scout team, a 4-man sniper team, and then a 4-man Anglico team. And what they were doing, they would go out into Eastern Ramadi, into one of the subdivisions called the Mulab and Sofia, really dangerous areas. And they would sneak into a house, which late at night, where the neighborhood didn't know. At least you hope they didn't know. We always got compromised most of the time anyway, eventually. But that was part of the plan. We sneak in, another team sneaks in down the road, so we kind of have supporting positions, right? And then we wait. We'd wait to see if we'd see IED implanters. If we got compromised, then they attack us. Eventually, part of the plan was to get compromised. Why? Well, they get compromised because then the insurgents react to us. Now they realize, hey, there's Americans in this neighborhood. We don't know how many, because they didn't drive in Humvees. They walked in here and inserted at 03 in the morning. So we insert, wait around, and get compromised. And then insurgents would come out of nowhere hunting us, trying to find us. And that's when they would make mistakes. They were reacting to us. And they would, they don't know where you're at. So the snipers we were with, right? So Harry Martinez, his team called Joker 4, which was a National Guard sniper team attached to the regular Army, 1st of 506 sniper elements. These guys were pros. And this is a National Guard team that was consistently taking out insurgents. They were planting IEDs. They were doing all kinds of things, just really good tradecraft. And we started learning from them. What are you looking for when you're out here on observation? They were teaching us, and we were learning a lot from that. So then my team, my Marines, started picking up on those reading people, what they're doing. We started identifying a lot of insurgent activity. And then, so basically when we would get compromised, they come out to fight. And then that's when we're shooting our weapons. We're bringing in precision firepower from aircraft overhead. And sometimes we bring in mortars, artillery, depending on where we're at, if we're outside the area. But the issue is for a small team, you had the ability to call in precision airstrikes quickly. You had snipers and you had scouts doing local security and able to fight back. And the scouts or the snipers and the Anglico team would be on the roof or inside the buildings, able to have observation to avenues of approach. And that's what we were doing. And we were getting so many kills with minimal being wounded that eventually the DOD sent somebody out to go patrol us to see what we were doing. And this SF guy shows up right before he moved out on patrol, and I'm kind of just talking to him. I'm like, what's up, man? Who are you with? He goes, well, I'm with the DOD. And it's obvious he's an SF guy, right? He was carrying one of those brand new, I forget the variant, it was a Mark variant of a machine gun. So it wasn't a 240 Bravo or it wasn't 240 Golf. It was a brand new machine gun. And it was pretty cool. But the DOD sent some out to figure out how are we getting all these kills without getting anybody really killed or wounded yet, right? Yet. And so they went out with us and wanted to know what was going on because we were really doing some outstanding work and just thinking outside the box. And these were just soldiers and Marines working together, figuring it out with support from the 1st of the 506 and Anglico. What do you need to do? Yes, you can do that if you think you can. And they were allowing it to happen. And we were calling in airstrikes, we were calling gun runs. I had Cobras going crazy on that stuff. And that's what it was. It was, I mean, my Marines were engaging all the time. They were throwing grenades at insurgents on the other side of buildings. And it was the intent, the fight was intense. And what I liked about it was that inter-service rivalry. I gave up that whole questioning National Guard and that whole rivalry about Army, Navy, Marine Corps nonsense quickly. Once you show up there, you got to get rid of that. And being able to be proactive and being positive with these other units really helped. And when we were in the shit, and a lot of this fight in Ramadi, they treated us like brothers. The 1st of 506 gave us whatever we needed. They were professional. And in turn, we didn't have attitude and with them, right? We weren't like, well, the Marines do it this way. We didn't care. This is what we need to get done. This is what we're doing. And they supported all of us. And it was outstanding. I was doing one of the operations. We were coming back during the daylight. And I was doing a company operation with one of their companies from the 1st of the 506. And we did, we secured the area. They searched for unexploded ordnance. They searched for IED and ordnance, right, and caches. So they did a search cache. We were just part of the security element because Ramadi takes a lot of hits and they needed firepower. So I brought in some Cobras, and we were done. And we're walking back towards Camp Corregidor. We're patrolling, and as soon as we get to the back gate, we're walking along, and to our left is these reeds, right? This big tall grass that's growing along a little canal. Other side of that canal is Ramadi proper, right? Buildings, right? 3-4-story buildings, 2-story buildings, homes and buildings, whatever. As we're patrolling, all of a sudden we get ambushed. We heard a couple shots, they're initiated it, and then all hell broke loose. Rounds were coming everywhere, hitting right by. Everybody got down the prone, just hitting the ground all around us, right? Just a lot of rounds were coming in, machine gun and AK-47 rounds. They weren't shooting RPGs at us at this point, just I think because of the reeds and stuff like that. So I roll over my back. I'm looking up the birds. I'm bringing in a gun run from the Cobras. And I just remember they come in, did a whole line of it, and they circle back around, and we're still getting a lot of fire. So these insurgents are shooting us from alleyways or in the buildings, so the Cobras couldn't get them, right? But we're trying to suppress it just to get them off it so we can get back into the camp. And but it wasn't really working then, so I had to bring a couple times. But then in that whole issue, one of my team members was kind of getting a hold of me. He says, like, Captain Angell. And I look, I couldn't hear what he was saying. And he low crawled over to me and he said, one of my Marines was shot. Sergeant Chad Dyer had been shot. And I look, I'm like, I was dealing with the control fire, with an attack ongoing, right? So I'm bringing in the Cobras. And I'm like, you need to deal with it right now until I can get on. I finish this. I have Cobras inbound. He's like, no problem. But then later on, when I looked back over about a minute or two later, and then Sergeant Dyer was shooting again. But that round, luck, had hit, and just enough where it traveled up his arm. It didn't go. It didn't hit muscle, but the whole skin up, and so he was good to go. but I wasn't sure at the time. It was just surprising that luck of the draw, it didn't, you know, one little millimeter to the left or right would be completely different, you know, as that round travels in your body and bounces, you know, hits organs and stuff. But sure enough, they come in, they start evacuating him, and they started doing bounding back into the gate under fire, and I'm still controlling the Cobras, and then I start bringing in rockets because the cannons weren't working, so I'm bringing in rockets to squelch it. And finally we did, you know, made it so they stopped attacking. You know, it's just shooting, you know, machine guns at us, and which is, you know, not fun. You know, whenever you can't move, you're scared to move one way or the other because you're looking for deflate, right? That little deflate they taught you in boot camp to crawl to, that's what we were crawling to. We were looking at any deflate because those rounds were everywhere and just hitting. And I had a couple wounded there, but my Sergeant Dyer, Chad Dyer, he was wounded, but he was a walking wounded, so he was good to go, thankfully. And then finally we made it back in, you know, with just a couple wounded. That fight, that was an interesting one. That was like, I didn't want to move anyway. You know, we thought, you know, you're gonna get hit, but you know, your training overrides that. Like, yeah, I got fear, but you know, I'm gonna be smart about it. Instead of pick my head up, trying to look up in the sky, I'm gonna roll over my back and talk to the aircraft, you know, to kind of keep a low profile because they're cannons. So they're shooting the cannons. They were real 15 meters. And you wouldn't allow this in training. This wouldn't have been allowed in training. It's way too close. It was danger close. So, you know, I gave the commander's initials. So if you're doing danger close, aircraft's like, I need your commander's initials because I can't, that's danger close. We don't know what's gonna happen with these rounds. You take responsibility if something happens. Commander's like, okay, gives you the initials, you pass them on to the aircraft, that's how that happens. So when you're in danger close range, you gotta get initials from the commander's initials to the aircraft. And we had to do that day. I've done it, Ramadi, we did it a few times because everything was almost close air support, you know, that close, danger close. So when you're in Anglico, platoon is actually run by a major because you have a bunch of captains and NCOs, and the platoon that supports like a brigade is run by a major. And our platoon commander at the time was Major Mike Rice, which in artillery community it's a big name and a really good leader, knowledgeable. There was just no difference there at Anglico. He was there to do an inspection of all our serialized gear. Just got attacked, and that was what he had to do. You know, you have that stuff that goes in there. All our serialized gear, did a quick inspection, make sure we had it, and reported back up to the company CEO. But that was it. Life goes on, and there is some decompression. But most decompression happens on your own downtime. Everybody deals with these things, as you know, their own way, and you know you can push it down, you can talk about it. You can just roll, you know, hey, that's part of doing business, and just deal with it in your own way. And every man out there, that's how you dealt with it. You know, as you know, you deal with these in your own way. We were doing those Task Force Dark Eagle missions, and almost all of my missions were with them. So we were doing small team work. We get up early, insert, get in a fight, exfil, right? Exfil later on that day or exfil the next night, right? Under cover of darkness or under cover of air support. That's how it was going. And these missions I liked because I wasn't in a vehicle. The IEDs were always the threat, and that's what I liked about these. We're working with some good soldiers, some great soldiers, aggressive, doing some cool shit, and fighting some really bad guys. But towards the end of the deployment, our air officer said, hey, we had our last mission. So our last mission is the actual mission before you're done, and then you take your patrol back to Ramadi, and you get on aircraft, go home eventually, right? You start your retrograde. So he's like, but since you're the one who always does these Task Force Dark Eagle missions for the most part, you can choose. Do you want to go do a Task Force Dark Eagle mission, or do you want to go out with one of the companies that can do a clearance zone? And I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna ride around a Humvee. I'm ready. We've been doing all these other missions. They drain you, right? Because it's really kinetic, and there's only you and maybe 11 other people, 12 other people out on these operations, and it's dangerous. So I was ready to kind of do something else. And I knew my Marines were too. And they would never say such a thing, but I knew. Because I told them, like, hey, we're doing last mission, we're doing a vehicle op with some dismounted ops on it. You know, you good to go with that? They're like, yes, sir. But since we did that, since it's not so kinetic, we have to do another patrol tonight do a soft knock raid with the Army, and then we'll be done. Fair enough, good to go, there we go. So last day of operations, beginning of March 2005 or 2006, we start off with one of the infantry companies with first of the 506. We're in vehicles, we start doing some clearing zones. We get out, clear a little bit, get back in the vehicles. Nothing too crazy in those rural areas, right? So this wasn't the built up Ramadi, this was the rural area called Sofia, north of, between the Euphrates River and Ramadi proper. And it was a rural, but it was really pretty, a lot of green, a lot of, they're farming stuff because they take that water from the Euphrates and use it, right? So there's a lot of lush vegetation, which is different than the majority of Iraq. And so that day, we're driving around, then we get word, hey, we got intel, the Iraqi SF are going to do a hit. We're going to provide perimeter security of their raid. Sure enough. So we roll over with them, set up a perimeter around this house, right? So it's a house, a couple houses together, bunched up, and there's a lot of foliage, and they got animals, and you really can't see as much as you normally can. So there's a lot of obstruction with our being able to observe the area. So we do the raid, kind of waiting for the Army SF to do their thing. Commander's like, stay in your vehicles, everybody, stay in your vehicles. Good to go, because snipers out there or something else. And I had to take a piss. So we're waiting in there. We're oriented down an avenue approach. Next to us is an Army gun truck oriented down that same avenue approach, kind of offset. And I had to get out and take a piss. I had to go. So, of course, my Marines were like, careful, sir, we've been here over 15 minutes. And that's usually when they attack, right? But I had to go. I usually have a Gatorade bottle. I piss in. This time I didn't have that. So I get out, go to the back of the gun truck, take a leak, whatever, do my business, and get back in. But I'm hurrying. But I noticed when I'm doing that, my body had internally, I'm doing this kind of Iraq sway. So I'm kind of moving around just a little bit, and I wasn't even doing it on purpose. My body was kind of doing it. That's how nervous, and my body was starting to come to that stress, right? And I was kind of like, what? It shocked me, right? I was like, what am I doing? I get back in the vehicle, but before I get in, I noticed there's a civilian photographer who's kind of with the Army, kind of doing an in-bed thing. I told him, like, hey, dude, you might want to get back in. They're going to attack us anytime. It always takes about 15 minutes before we're on objective, and they start coming out. He's like, oh, okay, whatever, right? So he's standing in the middle of the road, taking pictures, trying to get his Pulitzer Prize or whatever it is they do. Get back in the vehicle. My Marines are like, what'd he say, sir? I was like, he just ignored me. I was like, yeah, we'll see. Sure enough, not even 5 minutes later, we hear a crack. You hear that round hit the meat, hits him in the leg, spun him around. He goes down next to an Army gun truck. And we're like, here we go. And we're all looking ahead. You see anything? You see anything? My gunner, Mike Anderson, up there. I'm like, you see anything, Mike? He's like, negative. I don't see anything out there yet, because there was so much foliage you couldn't tell, right? But we knew because of the sound, he was in front of us, and but we didn't know where. And without PID, you're not supposed to just spray, right? During the invasion, we might have just put down some suppressive fire, but we didn't do that here because you can't. You're not supposed to. And so, sure enough, another crack hit that reporter again. The Army medic jumps out from that vehicle, starts providing first aid. Then he gets hit, bam. So they finally pop some smoke to give him some concealment. I tell my driver, Dyer, I'm like, hey, Dyer, move up, block them, physically block them so they can't see with our gun truck, because that other gun truck, I'm not sure what they were doing. We had to provide it. So he hauls ass up there, blocks it. We're still oriented down avenue approach, give them some concealment and cover, right, while they work on those two wounded. One, they're working on that soldier, and two, they're working on the civilian photographer. Out of nowhere comes a huge orange dump truck, probably about 200 or 300 meters away. There was a curve in the road. He comes barreling around that curve fast. And in Ramadi in 05, 06, 07, orange dump trucks were infamous for SVB IEDs. So SVB IED is a suicide-borne IED, right? So basically a car bomb, a suicide bomber, filled with explosives. And they tried to take they'd attack hardened positions with these dump trucks in Ramadi all the time. Get a suicide bomber, blow it up in front of this ECP, blow it up in front of this OP hotel. I mean, there was even a couple of Marines who got the Navy Cross for standing their ground while the Iraqi Army fled for standing their ground and attacking a suicide vehicle that was an orange dump truck during a whole time frame or later on. So he comes out there. We just have seconds. We don't have minutes to kind of start doing a escalation of basically the issue you're supposed to do is say it's graduated warnings, right? So if you have time, maybe do a warning shot, maybe do flares to kind of get them to slow down. Escalation of force. That's what I was looking for, right? So usually during the escalation of force, you can do that kind of graduated. Here we didn't have time. This guy's fast. We just got attacked. Orange dump trucks are notorious in Ramadi, and this was the beginning of kind of the whole battle of Ramadi, right? And my gunner, sure enough, doing Marine, he unloosed a couple bursts into that cab of that dump truck. Shoots immediately. That guy slams on the brakes. One of and slumps over, and the driver was fucking dead. He just took a couple bursts from a 240 Golf in the cab, but the passenger with him ran off, quickly. So that stops right there. What the hell just happened? In the middle of less than like 5 minutes, everything happened at once, right? We thought we were getting hit by an SVBID. Snipers just shot a photographer and a soldier, and that quiets down. So we had to get these people out of there. We had to get them to Charlie Med, or to a medical facility in Ramadi, and that's what we did. Turn around, drop them off, get back out in the sector, even after all that, right? And it wasn't too crazy, but that whole span of dealing with that civilian and getting shot, because ultimately here, and this is what a lot of civilians don't understand, is yes, we journalists go with our forces, and they're going to protect them. He's an American, we're going to protect him. But later on, I found out that he had wrote an article about that incident, this reporter. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to get, any legal issues later on. But he wrote that this whole thing about how he wasn't on anybody's side. He was neutral, which is, of course, is bullshit. Because if he was neutral, and if he tried to walk the streets of Ramadi without coalition support, he would get captured and killed. There is no neutral. They don't see that. He might think that. Surgeons don't. And I thought that was BS, because ultimately that soldier got shot because that civilian photographer put himself in that position. Even when I instruct, hey, get out of here, you're gonna get shot, they're gonna attack. He didn't believe us, right? He'd probably been in country 2 weeks, and what happens? He gets shot. And we're glad that soldier didn't get killed because of the actions of that journalist. I think maybe we could have gone back like, well, there's 2 people in it. Usually, suicide bombers don't have 2 people in them, but it happened so fast. We had just gotten attacked. I was coming around there fast, and they weren't stopping. They see us right there, and they were coming. And so, one of my Marines, Mike Anderson, did what he had to do, because we didn't have time to do a warning shot with flares, wave off, none of this crap. You had to stop the threat, and at the time there was a threat, and my Marine did the right thing. If you ask me, he'd done it again. Drop them off, get back into sector. Once we're done dropping off, we refill the vehicles with fuel, diesel, or whatever it is, JP fuel. Get a call, hey, we have an element in contact along the Euphrates River. They're in contact with insurgents on the other side of the river. Let's head out there because we might need to bring in an airstrike. Check, sir. They get me to the river. There's usual things, right? There's a couple gun trucks exchanging fire across the river with some insurgents who were pinned down by an old white Suburban, right? So they came out there, jumped out of the Suburban, engaged some soldiers, and then now they're getting pinned down. And that's what we're going to call an airstrike, because nobody's going to go across the river to try to get them, and we want to make sure that they're neutralized. So I get out, we stop. 2 of my Marines stay with the gun truck. Me and my saw gunner and my fire support Marine, John Curidan, we head out. I asked one of the soldiers, I'm like, where's the nearest contact? Where's your platoon commander at, or platoon leader? Hey, he's in that White House over there. So I was like, he goes, it was great. It's like, he knew who we were. He knew Anglico had been embedded with that company, that battalion so much. He's like, hey, sir, Anglico going to bring in some bombs? I was like, we hope so. That's how that brotherhood and that working together with these guys, that inter-service rivalry went away. And it was great to work with them. But anyway, get out there, head up to where they're in a house overlooking the river, and some of the soldiers are engaging. Get up there, and by the time I get up there, I hear my earpiece. Our officer always has F-18s overhead, and he was already setting them up on possible attack. So I'm monitoring. When I get up there, me and John Curidan get up there, we link up with the Army, and I'm like, what do we got here? They gave me a quick brief. I can see the white Chevy Suburban across the river, and incoming, outgoing rounds, right? But there's definitely a lot more. They're getting hit a lot now, because now they're getting 50 cal put down on them by the Army. And so I get up there. Sure enough, they passed me the birds. Hey, our call sign was Wild Eagle 5-7, and they're like, hey, Wild Eagle 5-7, I got 2 F-18s ready for you right now to give them a cleared hot. And I go, give me the information. Give me the information. Make sure it was safe. Make sure it was accurate. And then before you know it, they tell me they're pushing, right? So they're inbound. So they're under attack run. So it's F-18, the attack run, and usually you have to be able to get an eyeball on them, right? I'm not going to go into the nerdery of JTAC nonsense, though. I wanted to get a good look to make sure he's pointed in the right direction so he doesn't attack us or somebody else. So we're waiting for the F-18s to come out of nowhere, right? So we're looking up there, me and John and the soldier looking for him, coming out of from the south. And sure enough, he pops out, and we see him. Once we got eyeballs, he's headed it. He gives me his proper clients. I'm like, hey, call sign cleared hot, guns. So he comes down, and he's coming down. It seems like he came out of heaven almost, right? Out of nowhere, this F-18 pops there. Slowly gets bigger, fast. And so he's coming down. I gave him the cleared hot. He just, he lights him up with a 20 millimeter cannon, that vehicle. We're right there. It was so loud because we were so close. He was coming down so low and so fast that he was pointed back up in the air, but he was still going down. And a lot of times, I'm not a pilot, but they've told me that pilots can get something called target fixation. So they kind of get mesmerized by the target or whatever, something like that, right? So they kind of need to wake up and move on. Or I don't know, you might want to cut that out. That's not the best part to say about it. But the issue is when you have aircraft coming in, they can get fixated on the target and they don't pull up in time, right? And so that's what I was scared was happening. So in seconds, I see this. He's coming down so low. It was so loud, they couldn't hear him on the radio. I couldn't hear the man next to me. We were just like in pain. And I see this F-18 across the canal. He was probably about 200 feet off the deck. And for an F-18 doing a gun run, that's low, right? That's not a helicopter, that's not a Cobra. It's an F-18. But he's pointing back up and he's still going down. And then the science or physics of it started having this vaporization around him. So like white clouds formed underneath there's a name for that, right? Condensation, I think it is, underneath it, because he was coming in, the air was warming up so fast or cooling off or whatever the science is behind it. And I think this guy's gonna fucking hit the deck. He's gonna smash in the ground. And what are we gonna do? He's across the river. It'll take hours to be able to clear that area to get to him. But thankfully he overpowered it, and before you know it, he was back up in the air and gone. And all of us were kind of almost nauseous. It was so loud. But then 30 seconds behind him is Dash 2. So, but of course, the other aircraft, Dash 2, is his wingman comes down. He didn't come down that low at all, not even close. He stayed up a lot higher. And that just showed me how really low. I had never seen the F-18 get that low. And I was actually nervous that this guy's gonna fucking crash and right in front of us. And but he didn't. He was obviously a stud pilot, knew what he was doing. But to us on the ground, I'm like, Jesus, pull up. I remember screaming, pull up, but he couldn't hear me. Nobody could hear us. So that happens. Come back in, good. We waste that. We waste the Chevy Suburban, load back up, do some more patrol, and that was it. That was it for that day. But that night, we had another mission. And this is the last last mission of operations we had over there. It was easy. I was going to go in, and we were doing a turnover with an Air Force combat controller team. There was a major there, and we were just kind of doing left seat, right seat. And to be honest with you, I didn't have much into it. I didn't want to talk to this guy much. He was kind of cocky. And when I'm in country 7 months and I get somebody come to me kind of cocky, well, we don't do it this way, I lose patience real quick. I'm like, okay, fair enough. Do it how you want to do it. This is how we did it. You don't want to listen to me? That's your job. That's your business. So we meet up with the platoon we're going to do the soft raid with, and the Air Force major shows up with his driver. Great thing was his driver was a former Marine who used to come and play video games with our Marines, right? So we had a pretty good relationship, except for the officer that we had never met. So we go out that night, it gets dark, we wait to link up. So we leave the gates, we leave the vehicle, somewhere in the Mulab as a defensive position. We do a short dismounted movement to the house. It was a soft knock, so we'd actually knock on the door, walk in, as opposed to kicking the door, throwing flashbangs, right? Because there was a high-value target they thought was there. He wasn't there. This was my last op. Once that, I go outside to make sure I have contact with John Curitan, because Curitan was up in the gun, was up in the turret, because the Air Force doesn't do gun trucks. They don't do that, and they have the Army does that for them. But they're rolling around with us. My Marines providing protection. That's how I wanted it anyway, right? Because John's like, I want to go. Does that mean I'm gonna have to sit behind a machine gun? Hell yes. He was always up to volunteer. We went out into the Mulab. We carried AT-4s and law rockets. He had them on his back. This is the type of guy who had 6 grenades and shit, the type of kid. Just the guy you have to pull back. He's so aggressive, right? And outstanding. And anyway, get there, link back up with the vehicles, start going back. It's dark, going through the Mulab roads. It's one vehicle, and then the platoon commander's in front of me, and his vehicle and mine, and then a couple other vehicles behind us. Platoon commander's vehicle blows up. Driving night, just boom, flash, explodes right underneath it. Hit an IED. Immediately to myself, I'm like, fuck. Nobody was doing anything. I get out on my mind. I tell John, keep an eye out, buddy. And I told the Air Force major, I'm like, call the COC, request air support, so they can get in and start telling us if something's going on, right? Because they have sensors that can look down and see, what's happening. So I run up the back, very back left of that gun truck. I open it. I remember being surprised how easy it was open, because usually a blast would warp a door so you couldn't open it. Here, I was like, oh shit, good. Right when I opened it, there was a hole in the bottom of this Humvee, and this poor soldier was missing a leg above the knee. He's screaming. The two soldiers in front of him were screaming. They probably couldn't hear. The blast probably, ruined their hearing, made them deaf temporarily. And I remember kind of quickly shocked, but I could smell the cordite from the explosion, and I could smell the iron of the blood, because there was blood all over the place. Because shrapnel came through the bottom, cut off his leg above the knee, and then did whatever it did. And he's screaming. The leg, you could see the stump and the bone, and it was kind of singed from the explosion. And I immediately then take off my tourniquet and start applying it. I'm gonna talk, hey buddy, we're gonna get you out of here. You're gonna be okay, but we're gonna get you back. But he couldn't hear me. None of it could hear me. The ears got blown to hell from that explosion. But to me, that's what you do, even they couldn't hear me. Hey buddy, we're gonna get you, man. We're gonna get you out of here. You're not too bad. And they come up and help. They come in, one of their medics, right? Because the Army has medics, Marine Corps has corpsmen. Army medic comes up, hey, I got it from here, Captain Angell. So I go back, I kind of take a knee, just looking out, providing security for that medic. And they're quick about it. They get them patched up, they back up a vehicle, we tow it right then. They're still they're in there working on those soldiers. And we head back up there, this time in toast. I get back in the truck. Nobody says anything, except for John up in the gun. He's like, how are they doing, sir? I'm like, fucking lost his leg, man. He lost his leg. And I don't even know about the other two. But the guy in the back took the brunt of it, because there was a big hole in the bottom of that Humvee where that blast came up, and he was missing his leg. I don't even know where the leg went. I looked real quick. I don't know where it went. I didn't see it. Get back in the vehicle. We slowly made our way back to base and the Camp Corregidor. And we dropped him off. They go to medical. We get our truck, and it was, we had a machine gun. I helped John take the machine gun off the gun truck. And we stayed at this place called Full Metal Jacket. It was all the Marines stayed there. There was other enablers, might be some sniper teams, some SF guys, some EOD, some CAG at there, and Anglico was there, Full Metal Jacket. It was this old building. But I went there, I had done. I didn't want to go in and talk to the other Marines about it. I just sat there. I helped him clean off the guns, put our weapons up. I just sat down on the stairs away from everybody else with my gear, took my helmet off. And John dropped off the machine gun, came back out, and gave me a cigarette. And we both smoked a fucking cigarette right there, because, man, my nerves were on end. It's your last mission. And that happened, right? And the fact that it happened, period, and it was, it screws with your head. But what I noticed is that you go through this process of, look, I'm gonna deal with it, like I'm not making it anyway. So you'd be able to operate. But when you get close to going home, you see that on the horizon. You see going home on the horizon. And it affects you. Well, it affected me, and I know it affected other Marines. And you didn't want to do certain things, and you no longer had that, I'm probably gonna fucking die anyway. Let's get this done. You kind of like step back. And at that point, my mortality really jumped out. It's like, that could have been you. One slight move, that could have been you. And it wasn't me, or John. And we felt guilty about it to an extent. Why, I don't know. But so I'm sitting there, we're smoking a cigarette. John goes in, and I start crying. I didn't want to talk to any of the Marines about it. This poor kid lost his fucking leg. At least he's alive, right? But that was it. I was scared at that point, because I knew how close I came. But seeing this kid screaming, not hearing when I'm trying to help him out, and just, it affects you. It affected me that night. I wiped my tears off that night, and I went to bed and counted my days until I could see my wife. But there's a reason you go through that mental process of, look, I'm not gonna make it home. We need to get this done. We need to make risks. But here I was so close to coming home, so close, that it really affected me. And then seeing that soldier's fucking have his leg blown off, You know, we'd seen other guys get shot or killed, but this was just different. I think because it was my last op. It was right there in front of me. It could have been us. He was sitting in the seat I was in. Man, I had enough. And I'd been worn down from that 7 months, and it came out. I wish I would have met more, especially those that we worked with over in Ramadi and when I was in Hit and that deployment, because I talk to the same guys all the time, and women. I mean, there's women, F-18 pilots or Cobra pilots. We talk all the time. And you just know their call sign. The call sign is in their aircraft call sign, not their personal pilot call sign, right? All pilots like call signs, right? They all have these weird call signs, but I didn't know any of them, but later we did. But most of it was, they might send us a classified video. Hey, this is from the attack, check it out, dude. But that was it, you know, but I would have liked to meet them. And Anglico brings a lot of pilots aboard, right? Because it has a lot of, air support's a big part of it. So a lot of our air officers are pilots, F-18, you know, Cobra pilots, as well as some support pilots as well. And that's how you get to know that, get that community and working with them, because that's what it is. It's team effort. You know, the Marine Corps is perfected, in my opinion, has perfected close air support in so many ways. It's because that's what we do, right? That's what that combined arms and close air support's it. And Marine Corps is really outstanding about that. And then I had the chance to work with some special forces team in Hit, and they had an Air Force combat controller, and he just didn't know much about the Marine Corps. And they asked me to, hey, can you fill him in on the Marine Corps does CAS, close air support? And usually it's all the same. It's all a joint publication, but Marine Corps does stuff a little bit different. And if you want to operate with Marines, here's some tips on how to do it, how to talk to us, and et cetera. And that's what we did. But I never had that chance. I didn't meet him as much as I'd like to. I'd like to sit down and talk to him. That was our last mission, active mission in Ramadi, working with the 506th. The next time we were to get in the vehicles and go and leave was for our retrograde back to Camp Ramadi. So after that last operation, now our next task was to then depart Camp Corregidor in Eastern Ramadi to head back to Camp Ramadi to then ultimately go home, right? So you go through Al Asad, you go through Kuwait, then you go to Maine and go home. So our first step though is to get through Route Michigan. So the following night, we're all packed up. We have a few vehicles because there's a few Anglico teams, and the Army's going to give us an escort down Route Michigan, right? So we said goodbye. It was great. The first of 506, their scout and their snipers came out to say goodbye. Their battalion commander, company commanders, battalion opso, you know, just say goodbye. And they were like, thank you. And it was really nice to see that inter-service camaraderie, you know, working together for the common mission. However, sun went down and we started down Route Michigan. And then we go through, there's an OP, it's actually a building that the Army held. It's a fortified building because it overlooks big portions of Route Michigan. It's called OP Hotel. And they have sniper position, machine guns. It's a big target. Our insurgents used to hit it all the time. And so we pass that, it's dark, IED goes off behind us, like right next to us, but it hits our vehicle. And we had a little trailer because we had all our gear in it. Hits that, but then also hits the vehicle behind us, one of the other teams. Instantly I kind of go through this in the intro of the book, but just that explosion, and then we stop. We're rolling. I can look through, it's night, so I have my NVGs on. I'm looking in the rearview mirror, and I could see through the infrared headlights that they have, the HUD covers, that they weren't moving, our other team. Captain Shane Murray and his team, Corporal Donnelly and them, were behind us, and they got hit by an IED. They weren't moving, but the convoy kept going out. And usually the SOP is, when you're hit by an IED, get out of the kill zone, right? Because you don't know how much more there is. So we get hit, we roll a little bit, I'm like, stop, because they're back, they're not moving. And I can't have comms with them. I'm trying to get them, like, you know, Wild Eagle, you know, whatever the call sign is, they're not getting back to me. So I'm looking, nothing. I tell them to drive, turn around. Turns around so we can go help them out, because we don't know what's going on behind it. They could be getting overrun, they could be dead. We don't know, because when I contacted the Army that was giving a convoy escort to us, they're like, no, get out of kill zone. I was like, I'm not leaving my Marines. But I knew the SOP well. That's what you do. But I'm not leaving the Marines, right? Marines don't leave each other. And so turn around and help them out. And Shane Murray, one of the other captains, got wounded from the IED. Not too bad, but he got evac that night. And one of his team, saved his ass. And then the Army came in, helped us drag his, vehicle back to base. So we had to wait till the next night to leave. So that was our kiss goodbye from Ramadi, right? Another kick in the junk from that city. Dragging you under, man. They're not letting you go. Oh, wow. It's like the fucking sharks. They don't know, man. Manually, we do. That's a mine. November of 2005, my team got pulled from Ramadi for a month. They sent us to Hit. It's called Al Hit, and it's on the Euphrates River. It's on the west side of Euphrates River. And we went there. It was being run and secured by an Army National Guard unit from the 155th Brigade Combat Team, right? 155 Brigade Combat Team. Issue here is these were Mississippi National Guard artillery battalion that had been trained as infantry battalion for the deployment. A lot of people are probably thinking, provisional infantry, National Guard, or, people are like, this is not good. These soldiers were aggressive. They had been in country almost a year, so they were tired of taking casualties. The leadership wasn't about making sure they made general. They were like, let's kill bad guys so we can go home to our families and get back on with their regular job. These soldiers, their unit was the 2nd Battalion, 114th Field Artillery, but they weren't artillery. They were doing provisional infantry, and they had a couple artillery. They had an artillery battery that was with them, providing artillery support, right? But most of their stuff, they were doing ECPs, patrols, raids, all this stuff the infantry battalion would do. Might not have been as sexy as some people might think it needs to be. It didn't matter. They were getting what needs to get done, and they were taking casualties. So when we showed up, anytime there was an issue, they were like, clear, yeah, approved. They weren't messing around. They didn't want to know the details. They were quick to make a decision, and when speed matters, that was beneficial for us. And we realized that really quick. So when I showed up to Hit, I introduced myself. They're like, well, where do you need to be? My first question was, well, where do you get attacked the most? Where are you getting attacked the most? And they're like, Combat Outpost 3. And it was a small little section right there on the Euphrates River in Hit. And I was like, fine, I want to go there. Let's send my team there every few days. We'll spend the night for a few nights, come back to FOB Hit, rest, refit, go back. So that's what we did. And it got, that's what they got attacked. We got attacked all the time with her. And they were quick to like, hey, can we bring an aircraft? Yes, approved. all the time. And it was nice, because in Ramadi, if you want to drop a bomb, you had to have permission from high up. Now we could do gun runs or like they call them LMAV, laser guided maverick missiles. That wasn't as big as a 500-pound bomb. So you didn't have to have approval for that except for the ground commander. So you didn't have to have some general sign off on it. You want to drop a bomb in Ramadi, a 500-pound bomb, the Marine general had to fucking approve it at the time, because it was a provisional capital of Alabama province and the media's in there. So we had to have approval. That wasn't the case when we were out in Hit, and the Army, the National Guard was quick to give us approval when we needed it. They weren't cowboys about it. They were like, approved, and they sent us air. Anytime we're getting troops in contact, hey, Waldy, you got aircraft inbound. They jump up on my control net. We start working them, and it was nice. Those soldiers with 2114, they were great. One day, we came back from a few days at COP 3. We come back to our room at FOB Hit, at the base Hit, outside of the city. Immediately, someone knocks on our door. Hey, Captain Angell, they want you in the talk. I run down to the talk. They tell me, hey, we're under attack at COP 3 again. We're going to send you back out there. Immediately, my team was quick. We knew how to set stuff up, so we just grab our personal gear, throw it in the gun truck, we're out, right? There was no setting up all this other stuff. So I'm like, okay, no, I grab my team, and we get escorted in back in the city and between two tanks, two M1 Abrams and one lone, armored Humvee rolling through this. So I'm like, great. If the IED is going to hit anybody, it's going to be us, right? But there was no IED that day. So we show up at COP 3, and they realized there was an Iraqi army post right there, and then one of their soldiers had been killed. So they told me, hey, head to the Iraqi army post. Run up there at the top level that overlooked the bridge that crossed the Euphrates, a mosque, and some buildings, right, and a road. Pretty good observation field of fire. Get up there, and the Iraqis were decimated. They're hiding behind the wall. There's still blood all over from when that other Iraqi got killed, and they were just decimated. So we get up there, we're trying to get situational awareness, trying to figure out what happened, right? And we don't speak Arabic, except for Sergeant Anderson speaks pretty good gibberish that they're able to translate pretty good, and he was just outstanding at that. Mike Anderson, he was able to talk, because Anglico gave us a lot of language training. It's the whole liaison part of it, right? Because we had to work with the Iraqi army a lot, and this is one of those cases. And so Mike Anderson was able to speak pretty good Arabic, enough to where we understood. So, but when I get there, I'm realizing they're hurt, they're decimated, and we need to figure out what's on the other side of this wall. So one of the first things I do is like, look, I need to look over, see what's going on. So right when I peek my head over that wall, crack, that sniper was waiting for somebody to do that. That round went so close, you feel that overpressure right there. I feel like the wind, right? You feel the wind, and just as it passes through, just close. And Mike Anderson and John Kieran are right next to me, and Chad Dyer on my team, he was over there talking on the radio, and but everybody's got kind of covered. But I had stood up to take a look. Right then, that round cracked right there. I just immediately fell back down behind the wall. But then, my Marines, this aggressive Marine nature is John and Mike Anderson jumped up. John has a saw. He has those parasols, right? So it's that shorter saw. Just started blazing away out there at the target area where they think it might have came from. What'd that do? That brought that Iraqi started like, okay, somebody else is up. So they jumped up, started engaging too, and it kind of got them out of their funk. Kind of could put a little more fight back into them, and that's what kind of was nice to see them do that, because they saw their dead comrade get shot right there. Dead, right? Shot in the head, right? A good sniper. Not some sporadic guy who sprays an AK down an alley. This is a sniper who killed their teammate. And so, but from right there, we started getting engaged again. And before you know it, one of the Iraqis comes over, like, he's in that window right there, right? In Arabic, he told Mike Anderson that he's in that window right there, and I could see it. And I had Cobras on station, and I had those Cobras put in a few good bursts of 20 millimeter in that window. And silenced the sniper. At least, or he displaced. I don't know. We didn't go see if he died. He just didn't shoot from there anymore. However, his buddies showed up, but they were across the river. And the Army didn't go across the river. It was kind of, look, we only have enough to secure here. We're not going to get ourselves in a trap going across the river, because it's probably IED to shit by the end of the bridge. So we started getting engaged, a little bit sporadic here. It dies off, and I have my ACOG up. I'm looking around across the river, just seeing it, because it was lush, right? Date palms, wheat fields. It was a lot of green vegetation somebody could hide. But there was a small building down by the water that had pumps, and they pumped that Euphrates water up to irrigate the crops. So I'm there looking, and sure enough, I see two people. It was about 300, 400 meters away, but I didn't see a weapon. I looked down, it was AK right by the building. And I was like, then right there, that was it. I knew that was it. That was PID for us. Switched off, saved, started engaging, and then immediately Mike Anderson, my team, comes over there, start engaging as well. But that guy I saw through my ACOG, he got hit, dropped into the grass, and his other guy stood up, grabbed their AK, and they ran behind the building. So I don't know who this guy really is, or if he exfilled out of there somehow. But we had F-18s overhead, and they had showed up. Basically, they showed up, and they know you're in troops in contact. They want a piece of the pie. And we had already used Cobras, and Cobras came in, and the F-18's like, hey, we're up here, we can support you. I'm like, I know, let me get approval, F-18 pilot, because Marines want to fight, and that's what was great having them overhead. And get approval, put an LMAV into this building, in this small pump house building, and I don't know if that insurgent was there anymore or not, but I got approval, and the Army approved it, and blew up this building. Not long after that, then we started getting more engaged across. They started shooting machine guns at us and AK-47s. They hadn't started the RPGs, but when you get shot with a machine gun, it's a significant emotional event. I cut that as kind of a cultural thing, because I think that culture there, it's like, well, we tit for tat, right? So an eye for an eye. You shoot at us, we're going to shoot back. I think it's a pride thing. And I could be 100% wrong. They could be dumb as nailed. I don't know. But it wasn't smart, because we were ready for it. And sure enough, they started engaging. Army, I didn't know anything about it. Army started dropping 120 mortars over there, and which is a big deal when you have aircraft overhead, because the mortar, as you know, goes really high, because it goes real high and then comes down. So it's where it is in the sky is pretty high up there. But you got to tell aircraft about that, because aircraft don't like flying when you're shooting mortars or artillery or rockets, and they don't know where that's happening. So I cut them off, let them know our gun target line, or actually my team did. They dealt with that, and then started bringing in some more Cobras, and sure enough, raked the whole area across there with just gun runs and rockets, and they stopped at that point. But it was in the book. It really goes into the detail about the emotions of it, because those, the Iraqi army, they were just devastated, and as a leader, whether you're an NCO or staff NCO or officer, you have to bring the fight. You got to get the initiative back on against the enemy, and they didn't have the initiative. We all were. We come up there, they're hiding, so we're like, we're kind of taking it clear, trying to get the situation. I didn't necessarily purposely stand up to try to get shot to get the fight back. It wasn't like that. It was like, I need to see what the battlefield looks like, get some situational awareness, and then I almost got killed for it. But my Marines, right in that, because I got shot at and I went down initially, my eyes were like this big, right? And Mike Anderson next to me, he was looking at me like I got shot at myself. He knew what happened too. And lucky, just luck. And, or maybe I wasn't good of a sniper. But then we started engaging, and it really brought the fight, and that those Iraqis get back in to help secure their own country, or their own area. So the first time we went to COP 3, we stayed overnight. We set up a position. So we get there. The Army has a couple of spots I don't really care for, but I needed to get a position I could see and I could observe, have my fires, and I could get observation in case we need to bring in some air support, artillery, or whatever the case is. And I just wanted to see what I'm looking at. So we go up to the top of one of these buildings. The Army had a couple of soldiers just kind of standing up there, but it had good observation down the river, across the street, and to other areas. And so, Mike Anderson was like, let's make this is a good position. So we brought up our 240 Golf, brought up our weapons and communications, and started setting up there. So the next day, we're monitoring the radio. We have a little speaker that kind of, we can hear the Army going about their business, because we had to monitor that in case stuff comes up and let them know situations. We're just kind of watching, observing the area, doing what needs to get done, fighting boredom, right? So you fight that by observing detailed stuff, and then bullshitting with each other. But IED goes off. We hear it in the distance. They start chatter over the radio. Comes up, hey, this cold element's hit. With some wounded. The insurgents start up with IED, then small arms, machine gun fire, RPGs. Then they displaced, right? Shoot and move. That's what they're good at. Shoot and move. So what we realize is they're close to the river. So we're watching down the river, and about 1,000 meters away, about 1,100 meters, I think we got the distance. A couple of Iraqis jumping in some canoes, and they start going across the river, and a few more. And my team calls back to the Army. It's like, hey, we see people coming across the river in canoes in the general vicinity of where the IED went off. They came back immediately. There was no break. It was like, those are the enemy. That's PID. They attacked the convoy. Now, 1,100 meters away, we couldn't use our weapon. M4, a parasol, that's not going to do much. Or 240, that was at the limit, really effective range of the 240 Golf. And I don't know, the Army had 50 cals, but they weren't shooting. I don't know what they were doing. But I think they had different ROE engagement stuff. I don't know. But so sure enough, as they come closer to those insurgents come closer to the other end of the bank on the other far side, the Army pulls up, because we had notified them where they're at, and they start engaging with 50 cal and 240s at these insurgents that are in a boat going across the Euphrates. And sure enough, a couple of them make it. A couple of them, my Marines my Marines are watching. I'm on the net trying to bring in some aircraft requested, and they're like, "Hey, that guy just went down. That guy just went down." And I remember thinking, "Fuck!" I was jealous. I didn't get to see it. Right? It's kind of sick. That's the kind of mentality you start going over. You wanted to see that. And that's Marines, right? In a combat situation, I remember thinking, man, I felt jealous because I didn't get to see those guys, those insurgents go down. But they was young. And so a couple of them make across. When my team started calling in artillery out there, because they're going to go in there, the insurgents will go in, kind of have an assembly area and link back up with the rest of their team, and they'll disperse. But we started bringing in our artillery on that area there. And we must have killed them, because the next day, because those insurgents who got killed kind of floated down the river in their canoes. Those that made it across the bank, and then left or whatever they can. You couldn't see them anymore. But the artillery got them, because the next day there was about 8 or 9 caskets showed up, wooden boxes they wanted to take on the other side to bring on our side of the river to bury them because of yesterday's attack and the previous day's attack. And I remember thinking, this is how the system works. I remember thinking that my Marines, they brought it in fast and quick. They knew how to do artillery. I didn't have to tell them how to do it. They knew how to do it. They knew how to do that themselves. And the Army was quick about approving, that that's the enemy. So that way we can make decisions. And you got to be decisive, right? The Marine Corps pushes that, make a decision. The Army was good about that. At least though that National Guard unit was, and it allowed us to attack the enemy instead of letting them dissipate and think, well, they might have been it or might not have. They made a decision. We acted on the decision, and that's how it was good teamwork. And I like seeing that from the Army, and especially my Marines. They were quick about getting on that stuff, aggressive, but not stupid. They could have just put their M4 or a saw. You're not going to hit them that far off. Be smart about you. Don't give away your position. Be smart about your fire, and instead of use what you have. And artillery, we're using it that day. So we came home from my second deployment to Iraq in March of 2006. And so, but our dwell time was like 5 months. So we got back in March. We headed back to Iraq in August of 2006. So what is that, 5 months roughly. And I was still with Anglico, but Anglico at the time, we had a PSD mission, and PSD is personal security detail. So my Anglico team was attached to a personal security detail, providing security for 3 generals, MEF generals, as well as the governor of Alabama province. And that was OIC. I was the officer in charge of that. It's kind of an odd issue. You kind of get dropped into it, but typical Marine Corps faction, you move ahead. You do what needs to get done. So I wasn't happy about that. I didn't want to do PSD. I wanted to get back and do more real Anglico work. And but so when I got assigned that, I wasn't happy. But like a good Marine, you say yes sir and move on. And so we went over there. Me and my team went over there, minus Chad Dyer. Chad Dyer got out, and I had one of the Marines, another Anglico Marine, come up to join us. And so we supported the PSD, and most of it was convoy. Hey, we need to take the general to the Baghdad embassy in Baghdad. We need to take this general to Ramadi. We need to take this general to these areas. So, and then they needed a PSD team. So we had 3 of them. Each PSD team was about 5 vehicles, gun trucks, and then the appropriate Marines. So I did that. Majority of that last deployment, except for 2 months before that deployment ended. Those generals rotated back to the States, and then I went back to Anglico, doing real Anglico stuff, not just the PSD. And that was it. That was that time. It was most of it. There was a lot of exciting stuff there too, but Anglico-wise, I wasn't doing much Anglico work. The aircraft was intermittent, or you just didn't need it. Yeah. But it was dangerous because you're on the road. Yeah. We got back in March 2006, and here's another point going into Ramadi. I want to remind you. So I got back to the States on March 13th, 2006. And I was still in email. Some of those snipers, that's how a good team we developed. They would email me sometimes, or email my Marines and ask about stuff. But I got home. I didn't check my email for a day. And one of the team leaders, Staff Sergeant Martinez, emailed me. He's like, look, there was a Task Force Dark Eagle mission, and we got fucked up. I guess that the team had went out, the soldiers and Marines had went out, went to a house, kind of got into a firefight in that day, like we've been doing. Hey, let's wait to exfil it till night. We'll get aircraft, check our route, make sure there's nothing on there. Fair enough. The insurgents had learned, right? One thing I learned is that these insurgents weren't stupid. They learned from you. They're an enemy that adjusted their tactics to your tactics, and you adjust yours to counter their tactics, right? But in this case, they had learned that, look, it's more dangerous to attack a fortified position, right? We'd go in there, we'd set up a hard point, and that's how we were killing these insurgents. They were attacking us. Then they realized, let's wait until they leave. So at this point, that's what they did. They waited as the teams were exfilling. It was under cover of darkness, and whoever was in charge of the aircraft there, and I think it was the Air Force, they didn't have them do a sweep around the house with the aircraft sensors to make sure there was nothing going on. The aircraft were refueling, so they're departing without cover. And that's when they got hit. And one of the sniper team members, his name is Joey B. His name is Joey Bennett, and he was an outstanding sniper. He was one of the first ones over the wall as they were exfilling, lit up by machine gun fire in the chest. But he had a SAPI plate, and then he had his ammo, right? You have your magazines right here, and you got your SAPI plate. So all those rounds hit him in the chest, hit him in the SAPI plate. So I'm assuming he got knocked down pretty good. But the rest of that attack with RPGs, it killed one of the other snipers. And then all hell broke loose. They're in a firefight. They're ambushed, right? They didn't know they were getting hit. They got an aircraft overhead. QRF responds. QRF comes down down through the city, and of course they get IED'd. One of the drivers, the lead driver, killed on that QRF mission. and we had just gotten back. And the issue here is that it wasn't because we left, it was because enemy learns from your tactics, right? They learned that it's more dangerous to attack us when we're hardened up and ready to go than when we're leaving. And we don't have the protection and the support by fire and the aircraft that we have normally. And they attacked, and they got the best of us, the best of them that day.
Joey B lived?
Joey B lived, yeah, he lived. He's actually an Apache pilot in the Air National Guard now. So, I know, he lived, but they had some other wounded, and then one of the sniper team leaders, his name was Sergeant Silva, was killed. I think that name's correct. And then the driver, the QRF driver.
Wow, yeah.
So, you know, these missions, we knew it was going to happen. It was a matter of time, and it did. And it was just after we left. Not because we left, like we were this big part of that, but we left because the insurgents learned, and they applied that knowledge there. And anytime you, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, anytime you don't give them the weight they deserve, they're gonna show you made a mistake, and that's exactly what they did. Oh, and they got QRF comes in. Oh, we know which route they're going to take because they take it all the time, right? And there's only a couple routes, so that's it. They learned from your tactics, and they were smart. And what always frustrated me was when there was soldiers or Marines, usually in leadership positions, that didn't give the insurgents the credit they deserved. You know, and it's usually when somebody comes in new. It's usually those new units come in like, these are just insurgents. We'll take care of it. We're this unit or that unit. Like,
yeah.
Careful what you say, man, because these Marines and soldiers, these National Guardmen, they don't look pretty out here. They don't have your Marine standards, but they're fighting the fight day in and day out, and they know the enemy. And to underestimate the enemy is negative. It's not something you want to do. It's always frustrating. Our community, our veteran community, can be kind of, I hate the word toxic, but we can kind of be dicks about that nonsense. I see it online all the time where, somebody's like, yeah, I wasn't an 03, but oh yeah, I got my leg blown off. And somebody's like, oh, you're a pogue. Yeah, that type of nonsense. I get it, pride in unit, but that stuff's just not professional, and it doesn't do us any good. And in combat, I think that makes you, makes you vulnerable because you're not giving people the respect they deserve, or the enemy the respect they deserve. For one of those PSD missions is we were in charge of protecting general officers for the MEF that was overseas at the time, the Marine Expeditionary Force, those commanding generals, right? So there's three. There's like the actual commanding general, and there's a couple of deputy commanding generals. And we were tasked to providing security for them, as well as the governor of Al-Anbar province, which is basically a Tony Soprano-looking individual that was probably about just as corrupt, right? But he was our crook. He wasn't an insurgent crook. So we had to protect him as well, which was always interesting. But one particular mission is General Mattis, who was the Marcent commander, came into Iraq, and he wanted to do a couple stops. And usually some of his status flies, right? They just fly helicopter, safer, quicker. You don't have the bus. But knowing General Mattis, he wants to be on the ground with the Marines if he can, right? He gets a feel for it. That's just how the individual is. So we got tasked to drive him from Camp Fallujah to Ramadi, the government center in Ramadi. And the government center in Ramadi is probably one of the most attacked buildings, areas in Ramadi at the time, right? It was always getting hit. That's where the governor of Al-Anbar province, that's where local politicians stayed. It was just a hub. And so it was obviously a magnet for insurgent attacks. And the Marine battalion in the city at the time, I forget who it was, maybe one of the battalions from 8th Marines, I believe, was protecting the government center. They provided that. So he shows up, give a brief, drive down Route Mobile to Ramadi, and get on Route Michigan and Ramadi, and make our way to the government center in the middle down Route Michigan. Very dangerous, but nothing really happened, right? I mean, I had everything. I had aircraft overhead to help him. We had other units providing blocking positions. He's coming through the city, and the typical stuff you'd expect when a general officer comes through, especially General Mattis. So we get there. He wants to go talk to the Marines, and he wants to go up to the fighting positions at the government center. I know he had some people he wanted to have a meeting. First thing we do, so we get there, we park. His entourage, right? Because those general officers always have an entourage, right? There's always his aide and some other staff, staff officers and staff enlisted to help him out. So he might have had like 5 or 6 with him. Get out. We go through when you get out somewhere at the government center, you got to run in the parking lot because buildings overlook it. They can shoot down, they can drop mortars, and they know when you get there. Get there, everybody who needs to leave gets into the building securely. General Mattis wants to go up to the top deck. So we go up to the ceiling, and inside there is, there's bunkers, heavy machine gun bunkers all up in there. So we're up there, he's looking around, we got hit, right? Machine gun fire, RPGs hit the building. So I'm not part of the Marine security. I'm not gonna start shooting. I don't know where friendlies are out there. I don't know where any of that stuff is, but some of those strap hangers were engaging, and I'll let them do it. I already got my combat action ribbon, right? I didn't want to shoot somebody innocent out there. So they're kind of trying to do that. But the interesting start was, General Mattis. He went into a machine gun bunker with one of the Marines who, one of the 0331s, who was manning a machine gun bunker and was A-gunning for a 50 cal. I mean, and he was legit. I mean, he knows his stuff. And it was pretty neat to see him up there as we get attacked. I wasn't in there looking, but he's in there A-gunning for that Marine who's behind that 50 cal, engaging the enemy. And General Mattis, he didn't have to be there. He already had his combat action ribbon. He could have been somewhere safe, but he was there, and he was there. He was with the Marines, and the Marines like to see him. Of course, I was always taking people to the government center, so the Marines that were guarding it, like, hey, sir, you bring another group of tourists here to get the combat action ribbon? I was like, Marines are. They know part of PSD, so when you get these other, I'm like, hey, they want to come up here, man. That's the general wants to come up here, he's going to come up here. I don't know how that Marine thought about him being in there. Maybe he liked it, maybe he didn't. I don't know. It's synonymous with the Marine Corps, especially now. It was GWOT guys, Global War and Terror veterans. He was synonymous with them. Love him or hate him, he wasn't scared. He got out there in front, and it was neat to see that, and I was glad I was there. I get back, yeah. So I get back from that last deployment, I get back in March of 07. My wife had been pregnant, right? She got pregnant before we left, and she was about to have the baby, a couple weeks afterwards. And that was, you have a child, it's a big page turner. You think completely different. And so I had my daughter, and I was like, you know what? I think I'm done. I don't think I want to leave my daughter, my kids, for 7 months at a time. I had friends, I had Marines that were married, have kids. Mike Anderson had a wife and 2 young kids, and that's a real sacrifice. It's one thing leaving your wife when there's no kids. But leaving your kids, your children, completely different animal. And I didn't want to do that. And my hat goes off to those who really sacrificed and left their kids for that, because I didn't want to do that. I'd seen enough, and I think I was at that point where I had to leave Anglico, because I was there about 3.5 years, which is a long time. But I'd done 2 combat deployments with them, and I was like, and they're like, yeah, you got to go, and time to leave. And my options were like some career level school or whatever the case is, and I was like, you know what, I'm done. I was done not because I didn't want to do some of that stuff. I just really never wanted to be a lifer. I really didn't want to be a career guy anyway. I wanted to get up there and serve and get out. And then after 9/11, I wanted to see combat, and I care for what you ask for because I saw it. And then I think at that time I was like, you know what, I'll never be able to relive that experience that I got from being with Anglico in Ramadi, because the camaraderie, the training, the level of Marines, I don't think I could have matched that with what my career path showed. Right, I wasn't an infantry officer; I was an artillery officer, and there's great Marines in our infantry battalions, but it's a lot more conventional, right? Anglico is not an artillery unit; it's a kind of a fire support coordination. It's an odd unit, but it was fun, it was fulfilling. And I didn't think I could get that excitement from Ramadi, or the teamwork, or the adrenaline, or any of that stuff. Everything would have fallen flat. And I was like, you know what? And I don't want to leave anymore. All I saw ahead of me was Afghanistan deployments. Sitting behind a desk, I didn't really care to do any of that. And so I made the decision to get out. And so I got to stay in for another year. I got out in August and April of 2008. But during that year, Anglico was great. They let me, I was like one of the training officers, so I was out there really with the fix. This is how you do this, because all the experience we had found in Ramadi. And so we were training up these new teams, these new units to go, and that was great. I really liked that, because like, look, you think this is gonna happen? It's not. You think this, it's not. You gotta be prepared, you gotta be aggressive. Because some of the things I always thought that I experienced when you try to come into training was that, and I kind of mentioned it in the book, was that mount, right? So urban warfare and clearing rooms, clearing houses. And some people were on the impression that you don't need that. A FIC doesn't need to clear a house. The guys we're with would. I was like, maybe, maybe not. But on that deployment, when you're part of a 12-man team doing that Task Force Dark Eagle, you're clearing rooms. When you have to take a house to establish a hard point, you're clearing rooms. You can't let 2/3 of it do it while you sit back because you don't have the training. But Anglico was good at providing us that type of training, even though there were whispers of those like, we don't need this. That wasn't my thought. My thought was always, you want to be an asset to the teams, to the companies, the units we're supporting. You want to be able to do everything you can. And clearing houses, when part of a 12-man team, means you're going to clear houses. So it behooves everybody to get that training in, and they did provide that. But there were some people who were like, we don't need that, but cooler heads prevailed, and we got some good training like that. And that's what I liked about helping spin up those new teams that were going out, back to Iraq in '08, because they went back in '08, a year later. And that's what I liked, or supporting them. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't hard. Right? I didn't have these emotional issues. My hang up was, where's your team? Where's the fellow Marines, that camaraderie, your buddies that got your back? I was missing that. You go out there lone and unafraid in the civilian world, you're on your own. You shouldn't have to be, but you don't have that support like you do in the Marine Corps, right? Good or bad, right? You have that support, and you have that close relationship with your fellow Marines, and you're there for a reason. You're mission oriented. You really don't have that as a civilian. What I was able to do then is kind of turn that into, look, my mission is going to be my wife and my family. I had to keep that in mind when I was sitting at a desk. I came out as a security consultant, right? So providing vulnerability and threat analysis for a private company. And so when I'm sitting behind a desk doing that, that's what in the back of my mind is like, look, I'm here this is for my family. My days are over. My fun days are over. This is for the families. We can build this up. And that's how I got into it. I focused on that. And then when that started to kind of not do what it needed to do, I was able to, I started doing challenges, physical challenges, right? I had a close friend of mine. He was a former Ironman pro athlete. And I don't know if you know, Ironman is the long distance triathlons. So you're talking about a 2+ mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, and then a marathon. That's a triathlon. That's an Ironman triathlon. It's a long day. You got to train for it for a long time. So I kind of got into that slowly, right? Into that, and that helped me get that mission focus. This is what I'm doing. I need to focus on training for these, right? And I did a couple Ironman races, and then it was just taking too much time. I was like, okay, did that. I need to get back to the family. But my wife there, once again, supported that, because I think she knew that I wasn't doing it just to go do these races. I was doing it for something else. I was doing it to kind of keep pushing myself and focus so I'm not drifting off and want to do something else, because there was a period when I applied to a couple private military contracting jobs, and they were going to give them to me in Afghanistan. I never told my wife. I never told anybody, but I was ready to go. Not leave my wife, but go. I'm like, hey, I'm going to Afghanistan for a year. Well, I'll be back in 3 months for 2 weeks, and I go back again for, but I didn't do that. Ultimately, I'm glad I didn't, because I didn't want to leave my kids for that. But I was in my head, I was like, there's something else. But I'm glad I didn't. But that's what I was kind of at. She never asked me those questions. Of course, I was always open to her about stuff. We talk about everything, but she didn't. But I think she knew what I was focusing on, and why. But I eventually told her about that I applied to those private military contractor gigs. Of course, this was after the fact. I didn't go. So she's like, what? But I didn't go. But then I slowly started transitioning to writing. I wanted to put these experiences on paper, because I was old enough to know that these weren't normal experiences, right? You deployed, I deployed to combat, thousands of other men and women deployed, but that's not the norm. Less than 1% of the American population has ever served the military, and less than that in combat. And so I knew these were rare stories, and not just my experience, just being in the military period, but I wanted to write it down, because I knew that my kids one day would want to know what I did. Because as a young man, I wanted to know what my dad did in Vietnam as a Marine. And then I also wanted to know what my maternal grandfather did in World War II in Korea. But you don't have that. You only have snippets here. But I wanted to write it down. I knew enough that this was crazy stuff that I wanted to write. And it needed to go down. And so I did. And that's when I started writing a lot of this, my book. It came out August 12th. I wrote a book, it's called Running Towards Gunfire, Courage and Brotherhood in Ramadi. And this book is about my second deployment to Iraq that we discussed primarily. And I started to write it in 2007 because, just like I said, I needed to put it down there. I figured my kids would want to know about this. And I knew enough that it was pretty historical stuff. Not that I did anything specifically historical, but just to generally going to a combat zone is historical. And as an individual, and these are stories that I wanted to tell that needed to be known, and it helped me, right? Writing helped me. I don't know why it did. I'm not a psychologist, but it helped. Getting it out there, expressing my feelings, because I didn't just say this happened this time. In the book, I was talking about how that felt. What was going through my mind at the time, what was going through the Marines' minds, and how we dealt with these things on a day-to-day basis, and that helped me get through any issues I might have had. But it was slow, right? I started writing in 2007. It got published in 2024. I mean, I didn't write for that many years because I literally took years off, especially when my kids were real young. I'd write a little bit, then you're so busy, I didn't have time, or my job taking it. But then I slowly started chucking away, and then a couple of years ago I was like, I need to finish this, and that's when I really pushed into it and finished it up. Running Towards Gunfire, Courage and Brotherhood in Ramadi can be found. You can go on Amazon, or you can go to my website, which is Jason-Angell, Angell.com, and I have links to Amazon there, and that's where it can be bought. It's available, and it's got some great reviews. I even had former Commandant Marine Corps review it, and some other great writers and great veterans review it, and I'm pretty happy with it. Just real, humbled at people's statement and generosity when discussing it. All of us are always talking, especially since the book came out on social media.
Want to what? Just
have a reunion.
Yeah,
we need a reunion. We need a reunion.
Start that over because we're over that.
Okay, sorry. So, we haven't had any reunions for Anglico, at least from our group, right? But I know a lot of us would want them. Since the book came out on social media, a lot of these Marines and sailors like we need to have a reunion. We need to get together again because there was a tight group of us that went over there. The company as a whole, and especially the brigade platoon that we were with Anglico. It was a tight group of us, and it's a unique organization, and we want it. But people are busy, their families, and some people are other side of the country. It's tough. I struggled with the book in the sense that my real concern was how other Marines, especially Marines that we were with, soldiers we were with, how they would think. Would they think, are we bragging? Are we being, there's that, we're not silent professionals, right? That's by writing a book. I get it. But I'll be honest with you, I think that silent professional stuff hurts us, especially when veterans were out. Veterans need to tell each other, they need to talk to people, talk to someone, write it down, go on a podcast, make your own recording so you can tell your family, get this stuff out, this information, these stories, how you felt, because at least that's how I felt better. And people want to know this. You're not bragging by telling the stories, what really happened. And getting out there and telling these stories is beneficial to everybody. Young American men, young American women did some outstanding and extraordinary work in Iraq and Afghanistan. And those stories need to be told. And it's not just if you saw combat, there's all kinds of stories that are just people want to hear from these vets. The civilian population, they're too scared to ask, or they're just nervous. They don't want to feel like they're prying, right? So they don't want to ask, and then veterans would want to be hush about it, so we don't say it. But it helps everybody to get this word out, to tell people, because as we're all getting older, hell, I'm 51, right? And I left a war zone 15 years, almost 25 years ago or 20 years ago. It's still with me every day. I think about Ramadi, I think about those Marines, Anglico, I think about those Marines I was with 211 and 15 and 35. I think about them every day. It's just the reality we live on, and I think getting those stories out there can only help you.